The cloud has made it easy to store, access, and share data anytime, anywhere. This has given way to a never-imagined user experience, enabling users to access software and services through the internet. You can perform most of your daily tasks without even stepping away from your desk. Conduct bank transactions, buy movie tickets, conduct social conversations, upload health parameters, pay bills. The list goes on. Life has become so easy. Hey, wait. Who just lost money from their bank account? Who shared their personal details unknowingly while booking a movie ticket? Whose social networking user account got hacked? Who clicked on a malicious link while in their office network? Do we want these to happen to any of us? Hello, and welcome to the Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate Training Program. Microsoft Azure provides comprehensive features and tools to help organizations protect their data and applications. As an aspiring Microsoft Azure security engineer, you must become familiar with Azure's security tools and features to safeguard data and assets. My name is Ramanujam Srinivasan, and I've been a technologist for the last 25 years. I'm a certified cloud and security architect and help Fortune 500 companies formulate strategies and implement security solutions across identity, infrastructure, data, and applications. My mantra has always been, security is not a product, it's a process. And you as a security engineer are the helm of it. I will guide you through this program to ensure that you understand the concepts taught and can apply them in real-life situations. This training program will give you two benefits. You will get an advanced professional certificate from Coursera. The course will also prepare you to pass the AZ-500 Microsoft Azure Security Technologies Certificate exam. The responsibilities of an Azure security engineer include managing the security posture, identifying remediating vulnerabilities, performing threat modeling, implementing threat protection, and responding to security incident escalations. You will also learn to fulfill these responsibilities by taking the 7 courses in this training program. Each of the 7 courses is broken down into weeks. Each week, you will build your skills through videos and readings and test your understanding through quizzes. During the course, you will meet other learners and discuss your learnings with them. You get real-life practical skills through ungraded hands-on activities. At the end of each week, you will take a graded quiz. This quiz will have AZ-500 exam-style questions. You can take courses at a pace that works for you. If you spend 5 or more hours per week, you can complete this certification training program in about 6 months. The courses will cover all aspects of security that a security engineer manages. This includes managing users, protecting identity, protecting the platform, securing applications, securing data, and managing security operations. In the first course, Secure Access with Azure Active Directory, you will use Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, to create and manage users and groups in cloud and hybrid contexts. You will learn to manage authentication in Azure AD and implement passwordless and multifactor authentication. The second course, Identity Protection and Governance, covers deploying and managing Azure AD Identity Protection. You will configure Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. You will implement and configure Azure policies and role-based access control in Azure. In the third course, Implement Platform Protection, you will implement perimeter, network, and host and container security. You will learn to enable and configure a distributed denial of service protection implementation. You will also learn how to deploy an Azure Firewall implementation. The fourth course, Secure Your Applications, will cover securing applications using Azure Key Vault, Microsoft Identity Platform, Azure AD, and other Microsoft tools. You will also learn to configure Microsoft Graph permissions. The fifth course, Secure Your Data at Rest, will walk you through storage security, data sovereignty, database monitoring, encryption, data masking, and using Defender for Cloud for advanced threat protection. In the sixth course, Managing Security Operations, you will learn to configure and monitor metrics and logs in Azure Resource Monitor. You will learn to manage applications by using Azure Monitor Application Insights. Then you will learn to implement, configure, and deploy Microsoft Defender. Finally, we will walk you through a capstone project in the 7th course, followed by a submission and peer review of submissions assigned to you. You will go through a project solution walkthrough and discuss it with your peers. You will attempt a final quiz and learn the steps for enrolling in the AZ-500 exam. Are you excited? Let us proceed to Course 1, Secure Access with Azure Active Directory. Hello, and welcome to the video, What does an Azure Security Engineer do? In this video, you will learn about the role of an Azure Security Engineer. Azure Security Engineers work with architects,
administrators, and developers to plan and implement solutions that meet security and compliance requirements.
Imagine that you have joined a healthcare company as an Azure Security Engineer. The company uses multiple systems to support critical functions, including patient care and administration. Are you aware that healthcare systems store large amounts of sensitive personal information, such as patient health records? As an Azure Security Engineer, your primary objective is to protect the organization's digital assets from unauthorized access, theft, or damage. You will implement and monitor security measures for this healthcare company. What activities will you perform in this role? You will implement, manage, and monitor security for resources in Azure, multi-cloud, and hybrid environments as part of an end-to-end infrastructure. You will also manage the security posture. In addition, you will recommend security components and configurations to protect identity and access, data, applications, and network. Let's group the activities you would perform into 4 categories. They are identifying and assessing security risks, defining and implementing security controls, monitoring, and handling security incidents. Let's look at identifying and assessing security risks. How do you do this? You will understand the various systems and networks used by the organization to identify risks and define risk mitigation plans. You will also perform threat modeling and identify vulnerabilities in the system, such as a weak password policy. You will then implement threat protection to prevent these threats from occurring. The next set of activities is defining and implementing security controls. You will implement antivirus software, firewalls, and intrusion detection systems as part of this. You will also assist in configuring security policies, including access control and data protection policies. You will use services such as Azure Active Directory to manage identity and access, including configuring authentication methods and rule-based access. For example, you may provide access to patient data only for specific roles and use encryption to protect the patient data. You will also implement advanced security such as Azure Disk Encryption. Even if you protect your data, a vulnerable network can leave your data open to attacks. Is it your role to protect the network? Yes. You will implement network security to protect your organization's network, for example, protection against distributed denial of service attacks. How will you protect secrets, such as virtual machine passwords and encryption keys? It should not be like locking your car and giving the key to a car thief. As part of the Azure Security Engineer role, you will use Azure Key Vault for storing secrets to prevent unauthorized access to the organization's resources. You will also conduct security testing to find any loopholes in the system. Another activity that you will do is monitoring. It is not enough to identify security risks and put systems in place. You will need to monitor continuously for any threats or breaches. Sometimes hacking incidents remain undetected for months. You will use technologies such as Azure Monitor and Azure Sentinel to perform monitoring activities, including creating and customizing alerts and monitoring security logs. You will monitor various Azure security solutions such as Azure Security Center and Azure Active Directory. As an Azure Security Engineer, it is critical that you are up to date on the latest incidents and new technologies that improve your organization's security posture. Even with all the precautions, your organizations can face security incidents. What is your role in handling security incidents like malware attacks? You will support the investigation of the incident and determine the damage.
You will also develop and implement actions to prevent similar incidents.
Completing this training program for the AZ-500 exam will equip you with the necessary skills to perform these activities. In addition, as an Azure Security Engineer, organizations expect you to be familiar with security best practices and industry security standards such as Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in the healthcare industry. In this video, we learned about the activities performed by an Azure Security Engineer. Security engineers are critical in ensuring that security incidents do not disrupt the organization's operations. The broad category of activities performed by an Azure Security Engineer are identifying and assessing security risks, defining and implementing security controls, monitoring, and handling security incidents.
Certifications are essential credentials that can boost your value, salary, and employment opportunities. The Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate is highly sought after. This certificate enables individuals to demonstrate their expertise in designing and implementing a secure infrastructure on the Azure platform. You'll earn this certificate by passing the AZ-500 Microsoft Azure Security Technologies exam. Hello, and welcome to About the AZ-500 exam. In this video, you'll learn about the skills required to pass the AZ-500 exam and the exam process. There are 4 skill areas measured in this exam. About 25 to 30% of the questions are from the skill area. Manage identity and access. You can expect questions on identity and access management best practices, including configuring and managing Azure Active Directory, multifactor authentication, and conditional access policies. The next 20 to 25% of questions are from the secure networking area. These questions will test your knowledge of network security principles and best practices, such as configuring network security groups and deploying Azure firewalls. The third skill area is secure compute, storage, and databases. You'll see about 20 to 25% of questions from this area. These questions test your knowledge about securing Azure virtual machines, managing Azure Key Vault, and disk encryption. The last skill area tested in the AZ-500 exam is managed security operations. Almost 25 to 30% of questions will be from this area. The questions will test your knowledge and skills in monitoring, such as creating and managing Azure Monitor alerts and using Microsoft Defender for Cloud for security management and threat protection. You'll see that Microsoft has distributed the questions almost equally across the 4 areas, with slightly more questions on concepts related to managing identity and access and security operations. What about the prerequisites for this exam? Microsoft Learn does not explicitly list any prerequisites for this exam. However, considering this certification is related to an intermediate job role, those without experience working with Azure technologies are unlikely to succeed without additional support. The exam expects you to have skills in implementing Azure security controls that protect identity, access, data, applications, and networks in cloud and hybrid environments. It would help if you were familiar with compute, storage, and network in Azure and Azure Active Directory. To be successful in the AZ-500 exam, you should understand the fundamentals of computer networking and hybrid environments. It's good if you have practical experience with Azure administration, infrastructure as a code, security operations, cloud capabilities, and Azure services. Apart from getting a certificate and widening your job opportunities, passing the AZ-500 exam has other benefits. Passing the certification exam may make you eligible for American Council on Education College Credit, frequently known as ACE College Credit. In this Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate Training Program, we cover the topics tested in the AZ-500 exam. Across the first 6 courses, we teach you the concepts and provide you with hands-on opportunities on the topics covered in the exam. The capstone project in the last course will give you more practice and hands-on experience to prepare you for the exam. How will you apply for this exam? On the Microsoft Certifications page, you can browse all certification exams, including AZ-500. You can then use the Schedule Exam option to schedule the exam. You can take your exam online or at one of the Microsoft local test centers. Online proctored exams allow you to take the exam almost anywhere, but you'll be responsible for ensuring your computer and exam area meet security standards. Test centers are a great choice if you prefer a quiet, pre-configured environment without worrying about testing your computer and downloading software to meet Microsoft security standards. The exam consists of 40 to 60 multiple choice and scenario-based questions. You'll get 150 minutes to answer the questions. Are you wondering how much you need to score to pass this exam? You need a score of 700 out of 1,000 to pass this exam. You'll receive the results immediately after completing the exam. Apart from the pass or fail status, you'll receive a detailed performance report. A word of caution, remember to always look at the latest information about this exam published by Microsoft. We've provided this information based on the exam version updated on February 2nd, 2023. In this video, you learned about the AZ-500 exam. You learned about the skills and knowledge that would be tested in this exam and the exam process. You also understood that the 7 courses in this training program cover the various skills and knowledge that would be tested in the exam. Completing and thoroughly understanding the concepts will prepare you to succeed in the AZ-500 exam. Hello, and welcome to the video prerequisites for this program. This video will summarize core knowledge areas such as infrastructure, security, and data to strengthen your understanding of the basic concepts. When you learn Azure, having a basic knowledge of operating systems, virtualization, networking, and any programming language would be helpful. Also, it helps to have some experience with Azure technologies in an administrator-level role in both cloud and hybrid environments. You might only be beginning to work with Microsoft Azure and want to gain foundational knowledge of cloud services and how Azure supports these services. In this case, it's a good idea to complete the Microsoft Azure Fundamentals AZ-500 Exam Prep Specialization Program before starting this training program. The Microsoft Azure Fundamentals AZ-500 Exam Prep Specialization Program covers foundational knowledge of Microsoft Azure concepts, services, and core solutions and management tools. It also covers general and network security, governance, privacy, and compliance features. Let's look at some concepts you'll come across in this training program. These concepts are shared responsibility model, defense in depth, zero trust model, encryption, hashing, and data compliance. First, you'll understand the shared responsibility model. The shared responsibility model outlines the responsibilities of the cloud provider and the customer in securing and managing cloud resources. The responsibilities depend on the service model, such as software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. However, the customer organization always retains responsibilities related to information and data, devices, accounts, and identities. The next concept is defense in depth. This refers to using a layered approach to security rather than relying on a single perimeter. If there's a breach in one layer, a subsequent layer will prevent an attacker from getting unauthorized access to data. Example includes physical security, such as limiting access to a data center and adding another layer through identity and access control. The zero trust model is another concept you should be familiar with. The zero trust model verifies everything without trusting anyone. When you do not trust anyone, you'll strengthen the security. For example, you may not trust the password to validate a user, but may add additional authentication methods. Let's now get familiar with what encryption is. Encryption is a way of making data unusable even if it is stolen. You need a secret key to decrypt the data and use the data. When you use the same key to encrypt and decrypt data, it is known as symmetric encryption. It is similar to using the same key to lock and unlock a door. In asymmetric encryption, you use a public and private key combination to encrypt and decrypt data. It's similar to using one key to lock and another to unlock a door. The next concept is hashing. Hashing is converting input into a unique fixed length string called a hash. Hash is unique to data like how a fingerprint is unique to a human. If the data is tampered with, the hash will change. Hashing differs from encryption because it doesn't use keys, and the hashed value is not subsequently decrypted back to the original. What are some of the concepts and terms that relate to data compliance? The first one is data residency. Data residency refers to the physical location where data is stored, processed, or transmitted. You can determine data residency from the location of your infrastructure, including data centers and servers. You must follow region-specific regulations for data collection, storage, and use. Data sovereignty is another term related to data compliance. It means that the data stored and used in your organization is subject to the laws and regulations of the region in which it is physically collected, stored, or processed. This rule can add a layer of complexity regarding compliance because the same data can be collected in one location, stored in another, and processed in another, making it subject to laws from different regions. Data privacy is another important concept in data compliance. Providing notice and being transparent about collecting, processing, using, and sharing personal data are fundamental principles of privacy laws and regulations. Personal data is any information directly linked or indirectly linkable to a person. Azure has various categories of solutions and products. Therefore, it's a good idea to refresh your knowledge of compute, networking, and storage. You should be aware of web and mobile, containers, databases, and data analytics. You can also revise your knowledge about the Internet of Things, enterprise integration, and developer tools. In this video, you learned about concepts you should know to complete this training program successfully. These included concepts related to infrastructure, security, and data. You also learned that the Microsoft Azure Fundamentals AZ-500 Exam Prep Specialization Program covers Azure concepts and is a recommended prerequisite if you have less experience with Microsoft Azure.
Imagine that you're part of the IT security team at a university. You will be providing required access to users such as students, faculty, researchers, administrators, alumni, visitors, and even other IT staff. You are responsible for providing access to the right resources, such as the learning management system, academic research databases, and finance applications. Users should be provided access rights only based on what they need to have. For example, imagine the havoc if a student is granted administrative rights to the university's network. Or perhaps faculty cannot grade assessments because they lack access to a certain application. You will see severe consequences for providing inappropriate access or not providing the required access. Large organizations have many systems and various types of users. Granting access can become complicated. Is there a magic wand that can make your team's life easier? Hello, and welcome to Secure Access with Azure Active Directory, the first course in the Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate Training Program. Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based identity and access management service provided by Microsoft. You will use Azure AD to control access to IT resources based on business requirements. In this course, you will learn to use Azure AD. We have organized the course content into 3 weeks. In the first week, you will learn how to manage users in Azure AD. In the second week, you will learn how to authenticate and authorize users and apps with Azure AD. In the third week, you will do a project based on a real-life scenario and take a course-level graded assessment. Let us dive deeper and see what we will cover in these weeks. In the first week, you will learn about the role of an Azure Security Engineer Associate, the AZ-500 exam process, and the required skills for the exam. You will also learn about the different types of licenses to help you use Azure AD effectively. In addition, you will learn about security technologies such as firewalls and how Azure AD compares with Active Directory Domain Services. And then comes the time for some hands-on. You will learn how to create and manage Azure AD users, set default permissions, and assign and remove licenses. You will also learn to securely configure and administer your Azure Active Directory instance. You will learn to manage groups and administrative units in Azure AD and manage external collaboration by inviting people outside your organization to access your apps and resources. In the university example, researchers from other organizations may collaborate with your faculty members, requiring access to select resources in your organization. As you progress into week 2, you will learn to use Azure AD to manage secure access. You will learn to authenticate and authorize users and apps with Azure Active Directory. You will learn about password management and the password protection measures available in Azure AD. Is there another way of authenticating users other than with passwords? Yes. You will learn about multifactor and passwordless authentication. You will learn how to plan for multifactor authentication deployment, configure the MFA settings, including open authorization tokens and phone calls, and test MFA authentication. As you progress, you will learn how to deploy and configure Azure AD Connect to create a hybrid identity solution for your company. Your company may need a hybrid identity solution if it has a mix of on-premises and cloud-based resources that its employees and partners should access. You will learn how to implement pass-through authentication and deploy federation with Azure AD. You will explore how password writeback works and how to enable Azure AD Connect, Cloud Sync self-service password reset writeback to an on-premises environment. This week, you will practice enabling users to unlock their accounts and implementing and testing multi-factor authentication. The third week, which is the last week of this course, will be the most interesting. You will be provided with a real-life case study. You will play the role of an Azure security engineer and make several decisions related to securing access with Azure AD. This project will test your ability to apply most of the knowledge and skills you gain in this course. To refresh your knowledge, you will first get a recap of the concepts covered in the course. Following the case study-based hands-on project, you will take a course-level graded assessment, which will mimic the format of the AZ-500 exam. Time to start your journey toward becoming a Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate.
The cyber world has given us new risks, such as unauthorized online actions, data theft, data destruction, activity disruption, and exposure of sensitive personal information. As an Azure security engineer, you'll use available tools and technologies to prevent these from happening. Hello, and welcome to the video, What are Security Technologies? Security technologies are tools, methods, or systems that protect information, network, and devices from unauthorized access. Let's look at some of the security technologies. These are identity and access management, data encryption, firewall, virtual private network, monitoring, and container technology. First, let's look at identity and access management. Identity and access management tools help protect information by authorizing or denying access after assessing a user's identity and privileges. You can use identity-based access to secure your data, applications, and systems. How will you implement identity-based access? To implement identity-based access, you can authorize users to access only specific resources by creating users, groups, and administrative units to manage access. To strengthen the authentication process, you can use multifactor authentication. Multifactor authentication requires more than one form of authentication to access a system. For example, you can make a user enter a code they would receive on their device in addition to the regular application sign-in password. Are your users finding it difficult to recall numerous passwords for different applications? There are various features of identity and access management that you should use to make access user-friendly while creating a secure environment. Single sign-on is convenient for users as they can sign in once and authenticate their identity across multiple applications. You can use strong password policies to increase the security of traditional passwords. You can set length and complexity requirements for the password, force password updates, and establish rules for account lockout after failed authentication attempts. Another identity and access management feature you can use is token-based authentication. A token-based approach makes logging in faster when a user has to access a website or an app multiple times. Can you control users' access across internal data centers and cloud platforms? You can use integrated identity management to do this. You'll create a single user identity to authenticate and authorize all resources. You learned about identity and access management. Let's now look at data encryption. The purpose of encryption is to convert data into something unreadable or not understandable. Encryption ensures that no one can use the data for malicious purposes. Only authorized users having the decryption key can access encrypted data. Data encryption helps protect sensitive data, such as credit card numbers. When you encrypt data while it's stored, it's known as data encryption at rest. Data encryption in transit is the process of encrypting data as it travels from one location to another. It's necessary to encrypt data at rest and in transit in a cloud environment. In addition to identity and access management and data encryption, you can use a firewall as a security technology. A firewall controls web traffic, preventing malicious activities such as malware infection, distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks, and hacking attempts. A cloud firewall creates a virtual security barrier around your cloud infrastructure. What will you do if you want a higher level of security? Let's look at the next security technology, the virtual private network. You can use it to build and manage a secure network infrastructure in the cloud. This network service of the public cloud provides you with the benefits of a cloud-based infrastructure while meeting your organization's security and compliance requirements. Now, let's look at monitoring. You can track and analyze your cloud-based resources through monitoring. Monitoring helps you to detect issues and act before they impact the users. You can use manual cloud monitoring, such as manually checking log files, and automated cloud monitoring, such as using software tools to track cloud resources automatically. Container technology is another way of implementing security. Containers in the cloud environment let you scale large clusters of various aspects of your application with several configurations and designs. With the adoption of container security technologies such as Kubernetes and managed environments, you can manage the various security capabilities and configurations that match the speed and resiliency of applications. Azure provides these technologies through its built-in capabilities. For example, you'll use Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory Domain Services for identity-related services. In this video, you learned about the various technologies you use to implement the security of your data, applications, and infrastructure. These are identity and access management, data encryption, firewall, virtual private network, monitoring, and container technology. Imagine you're a security engineer at a research organization. The organization has staff in different roles such as researchers, administrators, legal advisors, and IT members. How will you protect this organization's intellectual property through identity and access control? Hello, and welcome to the video, What is Azure Active Directory? Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, is Microsoft's cloud-based identity and access management service. This service helps employees sign in and access internal and external resources. Internal resources include applications on your corporate network and intranet and cloud applications developed by your organization. External resources include Microsoft 365, the Azure portal, and other software as a service or SaaS applications. How will you begin using Azure AD? You'll first create a tenant in Azure AD. The tenant represents your company. You can create user accounts in the tenant. You have the option to create groups and add users to groups. By doing this, you can provide a common shared access level. For example, you can create separate groups for the research and legal teams. These groups will have different access levels for applications. Azure AD meets the needs of many users. For instance, IT administrators can use Azure AD to determine who should have access to applications based on company requirements. They can add more layers of protection to applications and services by enforcing multifactor authentication. Application developers can use Azure AD to allow users to use pre-existing credentials to access applications. They also use Azure AD to create personalized user experiences by leveraging the APIs provided by Azure AD. Azure AD also helps you keep user identities and applications secure through features such as conditional access and identity protection. Conditional access allows you to set conditions based on attributes such as user location. With identity protection, you can take proactive action on identity-based risks. The Identity Secure Score is a feature of Azure AD that you can use to understand how secure your Azure AD tenant is. This value, a percentage between 1 and 100, represents how well you match Microsoft's recommendations and best practices for tenant security. The score reveals the security effectiveness and helps implement improvements. You can find your tenant's Identity Secure Score in the Azure portal. In Azure AD Tenant, you will select Security and then Identity Secure Score. The dashboard shows how you compare with the industry average and similar tenants. It provides a graph showing how your score has changed. Now that you understand Azure AD, do you think it's the same as Active Directory? Though Active Directory and Azure AD share a similar name, they're separate services used for different purposes. Azure AD is a cloud-based identity solution that helps you manage users and applications. It's used for internet-based services and third-party SaaS applications. Active Directory manages objects such as devices and users on your on-premises network. You use it for authentication and authorization for on-premises printers, applications, file services, etc. The authentication method used and the structure differ between Active Directory and Azure AD. The service you use depends on your organization's needs. You can use Azure AD and Active Directory together to provide users with a single user identity called hybrid identity. Users can use the hybrid identity to access applications and resources on the cloud and on-premises. You will achieve a hybrid identity by using multiple authentication methods. The first method is Azure AD password hash synchronization. The user's password is hashed twice and synchronized between the Active Directory and Azure AD. Users have the same credentials to access resources on premises and in the cloud. The second authentication method is Azure AD pass-through authentication. This authentication method installs an agent on an on-premises servers that authenticate against the Active Directory. When an Azure AD user account tries to authenticate, password authentication is handled on premises through these servers and Active Directory. The third authentication method is federated authentication. This is performed by an on-premises Active Directory Federation Services server that validates users' passwords. You can use this method for advanced measures such as smart card-based authentication for users. Now, let's understand where identity-related data is stored. When you subscribe to a service such as Azure or Microsoft 365, your identity data is stored based on the address you provide during the subscription process. If you are a customer who uses an address in Europe, Azure AD stores most of your data in European data centers. However, some data is stored outside Europe. In the case of Azure AD B2B, guest users access applications through a link. These links are stored in US data centers. If users unsubscribe from invitation messages, their email addresses are stored in US data centers. In Azure AD B2C, personal data is not stored outside of Europe, but policy configuration data is stored in US data centers. In Azure AD multifactor authentication, phone calls and text messages come from US data centers, and global providers handle the routing. Open authorization code validation happens in the US. The push notifications for the Microsoft Authenticator app come from US data centers. In this video, you learned how Azure AD is used in identity and access management. You learned about conditional access and identity protection features. You also learned about multiple authentication methods to provide users with a hybrid identity through Azure AD and Active Directory. In addition, you learned about how identity-related data is stored.
Imagine you work as a security engineer for a global healthcare organization that has around 200 internal staff members. It also has many health industry customers and collaborates with healthcare professionals for projects. Your organization has an Active Directory environment on premises and wants to improve how it provides services to doctors and collaborates with external healthcare organizations. They are moving to Microsoft 365 and Azure. Which Azure AD features do you think would be beneficial for the organization? Hello, and welcome to the video, Explore Azure Active Directory Features. I am Ramanujan Srinivasan. Let's explore some essential features of Azure AD and how you can use them. Let's talk about the global healthcare organization that you work for. The organization provides many apps that internal and external users rely on. Users might want to access these apps from different devices and locations. How can Azure AD help? You can use Azure AD as a cloud-based solution to manage user access for all these apps, such as Microsoft 365, the Azure portal, and thousands of other software as a service or SaaS applications. It can also help your employees across internal resources like apps on the corporate internet and any cloud apps developed for the organization. You can use conditional access policies to require users to pass additional authentication challenges before they access an app. For example, you can configure a conditional access policy to require a doctor to complete a multifactor authentication challenge after their credentials are verified and before they access the app. Conditional policies are available for Premium P1 and Premium P2 license tiers. What if you want to monitor your app sign-ins? Maybe you want to generate reports that cover sign-in dates, user details, apps that the user has used, risk detection, location, and so on. Can Azure AD help with that? Yes. You can access those reports through the Azure portal or specific APIs for programmatic usage. Azure AD also has an identity protection feature called Azure AD Identity Protection. It uses risk policies to automatically detect and respond to threats. The admin configures the risk policies by using automated risk detection and remediation through identity protection. These policies then monitor for identity risks. When a risk is detected, the policies enforce measures to remediate it. For example, a policy might require a user to reset their password in response to a detected risk. The user then resets their password and the risk is remediated. You can configure a risk policy to set up how identity protection should respond to a particular type of risk. Identity protection also lets you export all the information collected about risks to third-party tools and solutions so you can further analyze it. Identity protection is available for the Premium P2 licensing tier. Another great feature is that Azure AD can be integrated with an existing Windows Server Active Directory. This will allow your organization to leverage its existing on-premises identity investments to manage access to cloud-based SaaS applications. You can also use Azure AD to invite external users to your tenant. Let's go back to the example of the global healthcare organization. The organization can collaborate with external healthcare partner staff members through Azure AD, business to business or B2B collaboration. When their work is done, you can revoke access for those external partners until it's needed again. Azure AD also has business to customer or B2C features. You can use Azure AD B2C to manage your customer identities and access. Again, going back to global healthcare example, you can use Azure AD B2C to authenticate the doctors through their preferred identity providers securely. That means doctors can access your organization resources using their official email ID, personal email, or any other identity provider that you decide. You can also use AD B2C to help you monitor for threats like brute force attacks and denial of service attacks on doctors' user accounts. Another great feature of Azure AD is Azure AD Domain Services or Azure AD DS. You can use Azure AD DS to migrate legacy apps from on-premises to a managed domain without the need to manage the environment in the cloud. By doing so, you can reduce the complexity of migrating on-premises apps to Azure. You can also use Azure AD DS to handle its infrastructure if it runs apps both on-premises and in the cloud. Azure AD DS lets you add virtual machines to a domain without needing domain controllers. This means that your internal staff users can access virtual machines by using their organization Azure AD credentials. So to sum it up, Azure AD is packed with features to help organizations secure internal, external, and customer identities. It is a cloud-based identity and access management service that enables your employees to access external and internal resources. It has features like Azure AD Identity Protection, Azure AD B2B, Azure AD B2C, and Azure AD DS. Azure AD helps you save time and gives you peace of mind.
Let's say you've signed up for the Azure AD organization. Which role would you be assigned? The Global Administrator role. Anyone who signs up for an Azure subscription is assigned the Global Administrator role for the Azure AD organization. Should you limit the use of Global Administrator in your organization? Yes. Users assigned to the Global Administrator role can read and modify every administrative setting in your Azure AD organization. That's a lot they can do. So how can you reduce the use of the Global Administrator role? Hello, and welcome to Investigate Roles in Azure AD. In this video, you'll learn about the various roles available in Azure Active Directory. As you know, a global administrator or company administrator can access most features and services that use Azure Active Directory. This includes identities like Microsoft 365 Security Center, Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Skype for Business Online. Also, only global administrators and privileged role administrators can delegate administrator roles. To reduce the risk to your business, we recommend that you assign this role to the fewest possible people in your organization. As a best practice, we can recommend giving this role to fewer than 5 people in your organization. Using Azure AD, you can design limited administrators to manage identity tasks in less privileged roles. Remember that the default user permissions can be changed only in user settings in Azure AD. Let's investigate the roles you can assign to users in Azure AD. These can be largely categorized into security and authentication administrators, application administrators, cloud administrators, B2C administrators, and corporate administrators. Users assigned the roles of authentication administrators can set or reset any authentication method, including passwords for non-administrators and some roles. They can require users who are non-administrators or assigned to some roles to re-register against existing non-password credentials. For example, multifactor authentication. They can also revoke a member's multi-factor authentication on the device, prompting multi-factor authentication on the next sign-in. Next, let's look at application-related roles. An application developer can create application registrations independent of the users can register applications setting. An application administrator can create and manage all aspects of enterprise applications, application registrations, and application proxy settings. What if you want a user to have the same permissions as the application administrator role, excluding the ability to manage application proxy? Then you can assign them the cloud application administrator role. Let's look at more roles. A cloud device administrator can enable, disable, and delete devices in Azure AD and read Windows 10 BitLocker keys, if present in the Azure portal. What if you want to assign compliance-related roles to the users? You can assign them the role of a compliance administrator or a compliance data administrator. Users with the Compliance Administrator role have permissions to manage compliance-related features in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Azure, and Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center. What if, instead of managing compliance-related features, you want a user to have permissions only to track data in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and Azure? Assign them the role of Compliance Data Administrator. Users with this role can also track compliance data within the Exchange Admin Center. There are also 4 B2C roles you can choose to assign to your users. As the name suggests, a B2C user flow administrator can create and manage B2C user flows, also called built-in policies, in the Azure portal. If you want a user to add or delete custom attributes available to all users in the tenant, you can assign the B2C User Flow Attribute Administrator role. A B2C IEF keyset administrator can create and manage policy keys and secrets for token encryption, token signatures, and claim encryption or decryption. Lastly, a B2C IEF policy administrator can create, read, update, and delete all custom policies in Azure AD B2C. You should assign this role to users if you want your user to have full control over the identity experience framework in the relevant Azure AD B2C tenant. Let's look at some more roles. The Azure DevOps Administrator can manage the Azure DevOps policy to restrict new Azure DevOps organization creation to a set of configurable users or groups. An Azure Information Protection Administrator will have all permissions in the Azure Information Protection Service. Suppose you want a user to be able to manage Azure Active Directory conditional access settings. In that case, you can assign them the Conditional Access Administrator role. What if you want a user to be able to make purchases, manage subscriptions, manage support tickets, and monitor service health? Assign them the role of Billing Administrator. Users with the Exchange Administrator role have global permissions within Microsoft Exchange Online when the service is present. Directory readers can read basic directory information. Groups Administrator can create or manage groups and their settings like naming and expiration policies. What about Security Administration? You can assign a user the role of Security Administrator. Users with this role have permission to manage security-related features in the Microsoft 365 Security Center, Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, Azure Information Protection, and Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center. Now that you know about the various roles in Azure AD, why do you think it's essential for you to take a thoughtful approach while assigning roles to users? For most organizations, the security of business assets depends on the integrity of the privileged accounts that administer and manage IT systems. Cyber attackers focus on privileged access to infrastructure systems such as Active Directory and Azure Active Directory to gain access to an organization's sensitive data. Protecting administrative access against determined adversaries requires you to take a complete and thoughtful approach to isolating your organization's systems from risks. In this video, you have learned about the various roles in Azure AD. As a best practice, the role of Global Administrator should be assigned to fewer than 5 users. The roles can be largely categorized into security and authentication administrators, application administrators, cloud administrators, B2C administrators, and corporate administrators. Imagine that your company has recently migrated its on-premises applications and infrastructure to Azure. However, there are still some legacy applications that require traditional domain services. How will you provide traditional domain services to these applications? Hello, and welcome to the video, Deploy Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Azure Active Directory Domain Services, frequently referred to as Azure AD DS, provides domain services such as domain join in the cloud. An Azure AD DS managed domain lets you run legacy applications in the cloud that cannot use modern authentication methods or where you do not want directory lookups to go to an on-premises AD DS. You can lift and shift those legacy applications from your on-premises environment into a managed domain without the need to manage the AD DS environment in the cloud. Azure AD DS integrates with your existing Azure AD tenant. This integration lets users sign into services and applications connected to the managed domain using their existing credentials. You can also use existing groups and user accounts to secure resource access. What are the managed domain services provided by Azure AD DS? The services include domain join, group policy, and lightweight directory access protocol, frequently referred to as LDAP. It also provides services such as Kerberos authentication and new technology LAN manager authentication, frequently referred to as NTLM authentication. How does Azure AD DS work? When you create an Azure AD DS managed domain, you define a unique namespace. This namespace is a domain name such as democontoso.com. 2 Windows Server domain controllers, frequently referred to as DCs, are then deployed into your selected Azure region. This deployment of DCs is known as a replica set. You don't need to manage, configure, or update the DCs in the cloud. The Azure platform handles the DCs as part of the managed domain, including backups and encryption at rest. You can expand a managed domain to have more than 1 replica set per Azure AD tenant. You can add replica sets to any peered virtual network in Azure regions that support Azure AD DS. These additional replica sets enable geographical disaster recovery. A managed domain performs a one-way synchronization from Azure AD to provide access to a central set of users, groups, and credentials. You can create resources directly in the managed domain, but they're not synchronized to Azure AD. The synchronization from Azure AD enables applications, services, and virtual machines in Azure that connect to the managed domain to use standard ADDS features. In a hybrid environment with an on-premises ADDS environment, Azure AD Connect synchronizes identity information with Azure AD, which is then synchronized to the managed domain. This provides a consistent identity for users. Azure ADDS replicates identity information from Azure AD, so it works with Azure AD tenants that are cloud-only or synchronized with an on-premises ADDS environment. The same set of Azure ADDS features exists for both environments. For cloud-only environments, you do not need a traditional on-premises ADDS environment to use the centralized identity services of Azure ADDS. Until now, you've understood what Azure ADDS is and how it works. Let's now look at its features and benefits. Azure ADDS is fully compatible with the traditional ADDS environment for operations such as domain join, secure LDAP, group policy, DNS management, and LDAP bind and read support. LDAP write support is available for objects created in the managed domain, but not resources synchronized from Azure AD. Azure ADDS provides a simplified deployment experience. Azure ADDS is enabled for your Azure AD tenant using a single wizard in the Azure portal. Another feature is that Azure ADDS is integrated with Azure AD. New users, groups, or changes to attributes from your Azure AD tenant or your on-premises ADDS environment are automatically synchronized to Azure ADDS. Accounts and external directories linked to your Azure AD are unavailable in Azure ADDS. Credentials are not available for those external directories, so they cannot be synchronized into a managed domain. Passwords for users in Azure ADDS are the same as those in your Azure AD tenant. Users can use their corporate credentials to domain join machines, sign in over a remote desktop, and authenticate against the managed domain. Another feature of Azure ADDS is that you can deploy applications that rely on Windows integrated authentication because of the support for NTLM and Kerberos authentication. Azure ADDS includes multiple domain controllers, which provide high availability for your managed domain. This high availability guarantees service uptime and resilience to failures. Remember, the managed domain is a standalone domain. It is not an extension of an on-premises domain. You can create one-way outbound forest trusts from Azure ADDS to an on-premises ADDS environment if needed. In this video, you learned that by using Azure ADDS, you could lift and shift legacy applications from your on-premises environment into a managed domain without needing to manage the ADDS environment in the cloud. You also learned how Azure ADDS works and its various features. Your organization uses Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, to manage various types of users. These users include your employees and people from your partner, vendor, and customer organizations. Your organization also runs external-facing apps allowing your consumers to make purchases. These consumers sign in with their personal IDs to your apps. How do you ensure these users are served well but are not granted any rights above what they need? Hello, and welcome to Create and Manage Azure AD Users. In this video, you'll learn how to manage users by performing these tasks. Add a new user, add a new guest user, B2B, add other users, B2C, and delete a user. First, let's learn how to add a user. You'll perform this task in situations such as a new employee joining your organization. Remember, you must be a user administrator or a global administrator to add or delete users from an Azure AD tenant. How do you add a user? First, sign into the Azure portal in the User Administrator role. Then navigate to the Users option in Azure Active Directory and select the Create New User option. You can now enter the user's information on the New User page. In the Identities section, you'll add the username. This is the identifier that the user will use to sign into Azure AD. Add the domain part of the username. Use the default domain name, such as yourdomainname.onmicrosoft.com, or a custom domain name, such as contuso.com. Enter the display name of the user. Username and name are mandatory fields. Next, add the user to one or more existing groups. For example, your user may be a project manager and might need access to applications that project managers specifically use. You may have already created a project management group to add similar users. This makes it easier to provide access to applications specific to the user's role in your organization. Group membership can be set at any time. You can also set a role if you want to assign any admin role to this user. In Settings, you'll find a toggle option to block sign-in for the user. You can also set the user's default location. The opportunity to block sign-in may be helpful in situations where you feel that a user's account is compromised. In the Job Info section, you can add the user's job title, department, company name, and manager. You can update these details at any time. Copy the auto-generated password provided in the password box and share it with the user for their first sign-in. Select Create. Users created in your organization have credentials that can be managed by administrators or the user themselves in case of a forgotten password. Suppose your organization has a subscription to Office 365. You can provide the user with a mailbox and Exchange Online. This will have an email address that includes a domain name owned by your organization. Let's move to the second set of users, B2B users. Imagine that your organization works with a consulting organization that reviews certain documents such as proposals created by your employees. They may need access to a SharePoint folder where these documents are stored and an option to interact with your employees. These users are external to your organization. You add them as guest users. You can select the Invite User option on the New User page instead of the Create User option. If your organization's external collaboration settings are configured to allow guests, the user will be emailed an invitation they must accept. When you invite a guest user to your tenant, you provide the email address of the recipient and a message describing the invitation. The invitation link takes the user to the consent page. If an inbox is not attached to the email address, the user can navigate to the consent page by going to a Microsoft page using the invited credentials. The process of inviting a guest is the same as adding a new user, with two exceptions. The email address will follow different domain rules than users from your organization. You can also include a personal message. Let's move to the third user category, B2C users. They may be consumers of some of the services you provide. For example, your organization runs a diet control app that allows users to track their calorie intake. There might be scenarios where you want to create consumer accounts in your Azure AD B2C directory manually. You can do this in the Azure portal but through a different screen. On the portal settings, Directories plus Subscriptions page, find your Azure AD B2C directory in the directory name list and select Switch. You'll then choose Azure AD B2C from the left menu and create a new user. If you have an environment with both Azure AD Cloud and Windows Server Active Directory on premises, you can add new users by syncing the existing user account data. As part of managing users, you must delete a user account in certain situations. These can include an employee resignation or the closure of a contract with an external partner. How will you delete a user? You can delete a user using the Azure Active Directory portal. You must have a global administrator, privileged authentication administrator, or user administrator role assignment to delete users in your organization. Global admins and privileged authentication admins can delete any users, including other admins. User administrators can delete non-admin users, help desk administrators, and other user administrators. To delete a user, you'll sign into the Azure portal using one of the appropriate roles. You'll then access the Users option, search for and select the user you want to delete from your Azure AD tenant. After this, you'll choose the Delete User option. Once you delete a user, the user no longer appears on the Users All Users page. The user can be seen on the Deleted Users page for the next 30 days and can be restored during that time. When you delete a user, any licenses consumed by the user are made available for other users. In this video, you learned how to create and manage users using Microsoft Azure AD. You understood that you could create various types of users in Azure AD. This includes users that belong to your organization, users that belong to an external organization who may be working as your partners or vendors, and users who need to access your applications or services as consumers. Your organization uses various Microsoft Cloud services, including Azure. As the IT administrator, you need to manage licenses for users in the Azure portal. How can you assign and remove licenses depending on the user's specific roles and requirements? Hello, and welcome to the video Assign or Remove Licenses. In this video, you will learn how to specify users' usage location in Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. You'll also learn how to find your Azure AD license plan and service plan details, assign licenses to users and groups, and remove licenses from users and groups. There are 3 Azure AD license plans: Azure AD Free, Azure AD Premium P1, and Azure AD Premium P2. You can choose the plan that best suits your organization. However, remember that not all Microsoft services are available in all locations, so ensure to specify users' usage location before you assign licenses. How do you specify the usage location? First, sign into the Microsoft Azure portal in the License Administrator role. Then navigate to the Users option in Azure Active Directory and select a user. Next, on the Properties tab, select the Edit option beside the Settings section. Then select the user's usage location from the Usage Location drop-down list and save the update. When you're assigning licenses to a group for bulk updates, such as disabling the synchronization status for the organization, users whose usage location isn't specified inherit the location of the Azure AD organization. Next, let's learn how to view individual licenses, check pending expiration dates, and view the number of available assignments. This information will help you manage costs, ensure license compliance, and help in resource allocation, planning, and forecasting. To find your license plan and service plan details, first navigate to the Licenses option in Azure Active Directory. Next, select the All Products option to view the total, assigned, available, and expiring soon information for your license plans. Note that total defines the total number of licenses purchased. Assigned defines the number of licenses assigned to users. Available defines the number of licenses available for assignments, including those expiring soon. And expiring soon defines the number of licenses that are expiring soon. Then select a license plan to view its licensed users and licensed groups. Next, let's look at how to assign licenses to users and groups. Most Azure AD services require you to license each of your users or groups for that service. You'll perform this task as only users with active licenses can access and use these services. Note that these licenses are applied per tenant and cannot be transferred to other tenants. If you have a business need to use a licensed Azure AD service, you must have the required licenses. Let's now look at how to assign a license to a user. Before you assign a license to a user, check if you have specified the usage location. Else the license cannot be assigned. On the All Products page, select the name of the license plan you want to assign to the user. Then select Assign. Next, on the Assign License page, select Add Users and Groups. Then search for and select the user who requires the license. Next, select the Assignment Options tab and ensure you have the appropriate license options turned on. Then select the Review plus Assign tab and select Assign. The user is now added to the list of licensed users and has access to the included Azure AD services. Licenses can also be directly assigned to a user from the User's Licenses page. If a user has a license assigned through a group membership and you want to directly assign the same license to the user, it can be done from the All Products page. Next, let's look at how to assign a license to a group. In the same way you assigned a license to a user, select Users and Groups on the Assign License page. Then search for and select the group to which you're assigning the license. Next, ensure you have the appropriate license options turned on and select Assign. The group is now added to the list of licensed groups, and all the group members have access to the included Azure AD services. Let's consider a scenario where your organization has reassigned employees to different departments. Now you'll have to remove licenses to certain features and tools that are no longer needed by these users and groups. Let's learn to remove licenses for users and groups. You can remove a license from the Group Overview page for a group assignment or the Azure AD Licenses page. To remove a license from a user, first on the All Products page, select a license plan. Then on the Licensed Users page, select the user for whom you want to remove the license. Next, select Remove License. It's important to note that the licenses a user inherits from a group cannot be removed directly. Instead, you must remove the user from the group from which they're inheriting the license. To remove a license from a group on the Licensed Group screen, select the group that no longer requires the license. Then select Remove License. So what happens when the sync for an on-premises user account that is synced to Azure is removed? The user is soft-deleted in Azure AD. In this case, the licenses assigned to the user directly or through group-based licensing will be marked as suspended rather than deleted. In this video, you learned to specify users' usage location and view your Azure AD license plan and service plan details. You also learned to assign licenses to users and groups and remove licenses from users and groups. Imagine you're a global administrator and your organization uses Azure Active Directory. frequently referred to as Azure AD, to manage user profiles. The management requires more details about employees for a survey. Your task is to update existing user profile information and restore user accounts that were recently deleted. Hello, and welcome to the video, Update, Restore, and Permanently Delete Users. In this video, you'll learn to update user profiles, restore users, and permanently delete users in Azure AD. You can manage the profile and settings of all the users in your directory individually. Permissions, restrictions, and other connections are all linked to the user's settings. Some of these settings may also be managed in more than one area of Azure AD. When new users are created, only a few details are usually added to their profiles. However, if the management requires more details, you can update the profile anytime after the user is created. Let's look at how to add or update user profile information. First, sign into the Microsoft Azure portal in the User Administrator role. Next, go to Azure Active Directory and select Users. Then select a user for whom you want to update the profile. There are two ways in which you can edit a user's profile details. You can select Edit Properties from the top of the page, or you can select the Properties tab. While the properties in each category are the same using both ways, there's a minor difference in the functionality that we'll discuss. If you select Edit Properties, the entire list of properties appears in the Edit mode in the All category. If you want to edit properties according to their category, select the specific category from the top of the page. You can edit all 6 user profile categories: identity, job information, contact information, parental controls, settings, and on-premises. In identity, you can update details such as first name, last name, and so on. For example, if you have 2 users with the same name, Chris Green, you could use the identity string to set their names to Chris B. Green and Chris R. Green. In job information, you can update details such as job title, company name, employee hire data, office location, and so on. In contact information, you can update details such as street address, mobile phone, email, and so on. In parental controls, there are 3 age groups that you can select from: minor, age 12 and under, not adult, age 13 to 18, and adult, age 18 and above. For example, this feature comes in handy for organizations like K-12 school districts where the user's age group may be required. The combination of the age group and the consent provided for minors determines legal age group classification, which can limit the user's access and authority. In settings, you can decide if the user can sign into the Azure AD tenant. You can also specify the user's location. In on-premises, you can view if the account is synced from the Windows Server AD. These values do not apply to Azure AD accounts. For users whose source of authority is the Windows Server AD, you must use the same server to update identity, contact information, or job information. However, you must wait for the completion of the next synchronization cycle to view all the changes. After you've made all the desired updates, select Save at the bottom of the page. If you select the Properties tab, the entire list of properties appears. In this case, you'll have to select the Edit option next to each category heading to edit the category. After you've made all the desired updates, select Save. Next, let's look at how to add or edit a user's profile picture. First, select a user on the Users page. Then in the Overview tab, select the camera icon at the bottom right corner of the user thumbnail to upload a new photo. If you're having issues updating a user's profile picture, ensure that your Office 365 Exchange Online Enterprise app is enabled for users to sign in. The changes you make will be saved for the user as well. The user's profile picture appears in Azure AD and on the user's personal pages, such as the myapps.microsoft.com page. If no image is added, the user's initials will appear as the thumbnail. Now, let's learn how to restore a deleted user. Once you delete a user, their account remains suspended for a 30-day window. The user's organizational information is preserved and can be restored during that period. After the 30-day window passes, the permanent deletion process automatically begins and cannot be stopped. The management of soft deleted users is blocked during this process. Remember that you must play the role of a global administrator or a user administrator to be able to restore or permanently delete users. Let's look at where you can view the list of restorable users. First, go to Azure Active Directory and select Users. Then select Deleted Users Preview to view the list of restorable users. Note that once you restore a user, licenses that were assigned to the user at the time of deletion are also restored, even if no seats are available for those licenses. If you are then consuming more licenses than you purchased, your organization could temporarily be out of compliance for license usage. To restore a user, first, on the Deleted Users Preview page, search for and select the desired user to be restored. then select Restore Users. So, can you permanently delete a user in the first instance without having a 30-day window? Yes, you can. However, please remember that neither a global administrator nor the customer support of Microsoft can restore a permanently deleted user. You'll have to create a new user and manually enter all the previous information if you permanently delete a user erroneously. To permanently delete a user, first on the Deleted Users preview page, search for and select the desired user to be deleted. Then select Delete Permanently. In this video, you learn to update user profiles, restore users, and permanently delete users.
Imagine you are a resource owner in a multinational information technology and services organization. Your organization has assigned over 1,000 employees to a project. Your task is to provide users with specific access to resources, and creating groups is the easiest way to do it. Want to know how you can effectively use Azure Active Directory groups, frequently referred to as Azure AD groups, to grant access and permissions to a group of users? You are in the right place. Hello, and welcome to the video Introduction to Azure Active Directory Groups. In this video, you will learn how groups and access rights can be used together to effortlessly manage your Azure AD users while also applying best security practices. Azure AD provides several ways to manage access to resources, applications, data, and tasks. One of the ways is to use Azure AD groups. So when should you use Azure AD groups? Azure AD groups are used to manage users who require the same access and permissions to resources, such as potentially restricted apps and services. Using AD groups, you can grant access and special permissions to a group of users instead of to each user. But is the security aspect taken care of? Of course. Limiting access to Azure AD resources to specific users who require them is one of the core security principles of Zero Trust, which is a security strategy. The Azure AD resources we are talking about could be part of the Azure AD organization, such as permissions to manage objects through roles in Azure AD. External to the organization, such as software as a service, frequently referred to as SaaS applications, Azure services, SharePoint sites, or on-premise resources. You're aware that Azure AD lets you use groups to manage access to resources, applications, data, and tasks. Now let's look at the different group types and the group membership types. There are two group types, security and Microsoft 365. Security is used to manage user and computer access to shared resources. For example, you can create a security group so all group members have the same security permissions. The members of a security group can include users, devices, other groups, and service principals, which define the access policy and permissions. The owners of a security group can include users and service principals. Microsoft 365 provides collaboration opportunities by giving group members access to a shared mailbox, calendar, files, SharePoint sites, and more. This option also lets you provide people outside your organization access to the group. However, unlike the security group, the members of a Microsoft 365 group can only include users. The owners can include users and service principals. There are three group membership types as well: assigned, dynamic user, and dynamic device. Assigned lets you add specific users as members of a group and have unique permissions. Dynamic user lets you use dynamic membership rules to automatically add and remove members. So what happens if a member's attributes change? In this case, the system looks at your dynamic group rules for the directory to decide. If the member meets the rules requirements, they are added. If they no longer meet the rules requirements, they are removed. Dynamic device lets you use dynamic group rules to automatically add and remove devices. In the same way as when a member's attributes change, if a device's attributes change, the system looks at your dynamic group rules for the directory to decide. However, there are a few important rules to keep in mind. You can create a dynamic group for dynamic devices or dynamic users, but not for both. You cannot create a device group based on the device owner's attributes. device membership rules can only reference device attributions. You will have to review the group and group membership options carefully to find the right combination for your scenario. Now that you're aware of the types of group and group memberships, it brings us to an important question. Can all groups be managed in the Azure AD portal? No. Some groups cannot be managed in the Azure AD portal. Let's look at the exceptions. Groups synced from the on-premises Active Directory can only be managed in the on-premises Active Directory. Also, distribution lists and mail-enabled security groups can only be managed in the Exchange Admin Center or Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So it's mandatory that you sign into these admin centers first. After creating an Azure AD group, you must grant it appropriate access. Each application, resource, and service that requires access permission must be managed separately, as the permissions are unique. A useful rule of thumb is to grant access using the principle of least privilege to help reduce the risk of attack or security breach. So how does access management work in Azure AD? Azure AD gives you two options to provide access to your organization's resources: by providing access rights to a single user, or by providing access rights to an entire Azure AD group. As a resource owner, you can assign access permissions to all the members of the group. The same privileges are also available to the directory owner. Note that the resource owner or the directory owner can also give management rights to a department manager or a help desk administrator, letting them add and remove members. Now that you have created a group and know the options available, you need to decide how to assign access rights. There are 4 ways to assign access rights: direct assignment, group assignment, rule-based assignment, and external authority assignment. Let's look at them in detail. In direct assignment, you can directly assign a user to a resource. In group assignment, you can assign an Azure AD group to a resource, giving the group members automatic access. Here, group membership is managed by both the group owner and the resource owner. This allows either owner to add or remove members from the group. In rule-based assignment, you can create a group and use a rule to define which users are assigned to a specific resource. The rule is based on attributes that are assigned to individual users. You, as a resource owner, manage the rule to allow access to the resources. In external authority assignment, access is provided by an external source, such as an on-premises directory or a SaaS application. Here, you create a group and assign a group owner to provide access to the resource. The external source then manages the group members. We have discussed the ways in which you can assign access rights to a group. But can users join groups without being assigned? Yes. Group owners can let users find their own groups to join. They can set up the group to automatically accept all users who join or make approval mandatory. If approval is mandatory, the user's request to join a group is forwarded to the group owner. The owner approves the request if required, and the user is notified of the group membership. If the group has multiple owners, approvals are required from all the owners. If one of them disapproves, the user is not added to the group and is notified. In this video, you learned about the benefits of creating an Azure AD group and the types of groups and group membership. You also learned the various ways to assign access rights to these groups.
You work for a multinational organization with over 45,000 employees across various regions and departments. Your organization's IT department uses Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, as the central identity and access management solution. As a group's administrator, you're tasked with creating and managing Azure AD groups. Hello, and welcome to the video, Create and Manage Azure Active Directory Groups. In this video, you'll learn to create a group and add members and owners, add members and owners to an existing group, remove members and owners from an existing group, add a group to another group, remove a group from another group, and delete a group. You can create groups to provide access and special permissions to all group members instead of to individual users. The Azure AD roles that can manage groups are Groups Administrator, User Administrator, Privileged Role Administrator, and Global Administrator. In the Azure AD portal, you can create a group and add members to it at the same time. To create a group, first sign into the Microsoft Azure portal and navigate to Groups in Azure Active Directory. On the Groups page, select New Group. On the New Group page, select the desired group type. Note that choosing the Microsoft 365 group type enables the group email address option. Next, enter a suitable group name. An ideal name would be easy to remember and suit the purpose of the group. If the name you've entered is already in use, you'll be asked to change the group name. In the group email address option, which is only available for Microsoft 365 group types, manually enter an email address or use the email address built from the group name you provided. Note that only group type, group name, and group email address are mandatory options. Next, enter a short description for your group. Then, if you want to use this group to assign Azure AD roles to members, switch the Azure AD roles can be assigned to the group setting to yes. Once set, the group's eligibility for role assignment is permanent. However, please note that this option is only available with premium P1 or P2 licenses and for the privileged role administrator or the global administrator roles. Also, this option automatically selects assigned as the membership type and enables the ability to add roles while creating the group. Next, if the Azure AD roles can be assigned to the group setting is no, select the membership type. Optionally, you can add owners and members to your new group. To add owners, select No Owners Selected. Then, on the Add Owners screen, locate the owners you wish to add and choose Select. Follow the same process to add members to your group. Then, select Create to create your group. A welcome notification is sent to all users when they're added to a new Microsoft 365 group, regardless of the membership type. You can also add members or owners to an existing group or remove them. To add members to an existing group, navigate to Groups in Azure Active Directory and select the group from the list of groups. Next, select Members. Then, on the Members page, select Add Members. Now locate the members you wish to add and choose Select. To add owners to an existing group, select Owners and add owners in the same way. You can view the updated number of members and owners on the Group Overview page. To remove a member from a group, select the desired member and then select Remove. In the same way, to remove an owner from a group, select the desired owner and then select Remove. Let's consider a scenario. Your group's membership type was set to Dynamic. However, you now have to add a different set of users and change the membership type to Assigned. Can you edit the properties of a group? Yes, you can edit a few properties. To edit your group's properties, select the desired group and select Properties. You're allowed to edit the group name, group description, and membership type. However, you cannot edit the group type and object ID. The only way you can change the group type is to delete the group and create a new one. Next, let's look at how to add or remove a group from another group. For example, you can add an existing security group to another security group. These are called nested groups and include applying settings like roles and access. However, Azure AD currently doesn't support the following: adding groups to a group synced with on-premises AD, adding security groups to Microsoft 365 groups or vice versa, assigning apps and licenses to nested groups, adding distribution groups in nesting scenarios, adding security groups as members of mail-enabled security groups, and adding groups as members of a role-assignable group. So, how can you add a group to another group? First, select the group you want to add to another group and select Group Memberships. Then select Add Memberships. Now locate the group you want your group to be a member of and choose Select. The group will now have the same access as the group to which it was added. You can view group and member relationships on the Group Memberships page. For a more detailed view, select the parent group and look up the page details of the added group. Next, let's look at how to remove a group from another group. You can remove an existing security group from another security group. However, remember that removing the group also removes any inherited access for its members. To remove group membership on the Group Memberships page, select the desired group. Then select Remove Memberships. So, can you delete a group? Yes, you can. You may want to delete a group for several reasons. However, the most common reasons are you chose an incorrect group type, you created a duplicate group by mistake, or you no longer need the group. To delete a group, on the Groups page, select the group you want to delete. Then select Delete to delete the group from your Azure AD tenant. In this video, you learned to perform the following tasks: create a group and add members and owners, add members and owners to an existing group, remove members and owners from an existing group, add a group to another group, remove a group from another group, and delete a group.
Hello, and welcome to the video, What is an Administrative Unit? In this video, you will learn about administrative units, their license requirements, deployment scenarios, benefits, and constraints in Azure Active Directory or Azure AD. You will also learn about group management. An administrative unit is an Azure AD resource that can be a container for other Azure AD resources. An administrative unit can only contain users, groups, or devices. You can use administrative units to restrict role permissions to a specific portion of an organization. For example, you could use administrative units to delegate the help desk administrator role to regional support specialists. This way, they can manage users only in the region they support. So can users be members of multiple administrative units? Yes. For example, you can add users to administrative units based on their geography and division. In that case, a user might be in the Seattle and marketing administrative units. However, note that to use administrative units, you need an Azure AD Premium P1 license for each administrative unit admin and Azure AD free licenses for administrative unit members. Next, let's understand the deployment of administrative units. You can use administrative units to restrict the administrative scope in organizations comprising independent divisions. An example would be large university comprising autonomous schools, such as the School of Business, the School of Engineering, and so on. Each school will have a team of IT admins who control access, manage users, and set policies for the school. However, there would be a central administrator who would create an administrative unit for the school, populate the administrative unit only with students and staff from the school, create a role with administrative permissions only for Azure AD users in the school's administrative unit, and add the school's IT team to the role and scope. You can also use administrative units to logically group Azure AD resources. For example, an organization with a global IT team might create administrative units to define relevant geographical boundaries. In another scenario, a global organization with semi-autonomous sub-organizations might create administrative units to represent these sub-organizations. So the unique requirements of organization determine how administrative units are created. Administrative units are a common way to define structure across Microsoft 365 services. You can derive maximum value when you associate common resources across Microsoft 365 under an administrative unit. While administrative units have several benefits, there are constraints as well. Administrative units cannot be nested. Also, they are currently unavailable in Azure AD Identity Governance. Next, let's look at how groups function in administrative units. When you add a group to an administrative unit, the group itself is brought into its management scope, but not the group members. In other words, an administrator scoped to the administrative unit can manage the group's properties, such as the group name or membership. However, they cannot manage the properties of users or devices within that group unless those users and devices are separately added as members of the administrative unit. For example, imagine you are a user administrator scoped to an administrative unit containing a group. While you can manage the name and membership of the group, you cannot manage user properties and user authentication methods for group members. You cannot reset the passwords of the group members either. For you to be able to manage user properties or user authentication methods, the group members must be directly added as members of the administrative unit. In this video, you learned about administrative units, their license requirements, deployment scenarios, benefits, and constraints. You also learned about group management.
Your organization is working on a project with several external partners. You must provide the partners' teams access to specific resources, such as Microsoft Teams, SharePoint sites, and other cloud-based applications in your organization's Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. How can you invite external users to work on these resources? Hello, and welcome to the video, Invite External Users. In this video, you'll learn to add a guest user to the directory and invite guest users, individually and in bulk, to use your organization's resources. As a user assigned to any of the limited administrator directory roles, you can use the Azure portal to add a guest user to the directory. You can invite external users to Azure AD and then add them to a group or an application. However, ensure that your organization's external collaboration settings are configured to allow you to invite guests. By default, all users and admins can invite guests. So how can you add a guest user to the directory? First, sign into the Microsoft Azure portal in the User Administrator or Guest Inviter roles. Then navigate to Users in Azure Active Directory. On the Users page, from the New User dropdown, select Invite External User. On the New User page, in the email address option, which is mandatory, enter the email address of the user you would like to invite to your directory. Note that you cannot enter group email addresses. After entering the desired guest user details, select Invite. Once the invitation is sent, the user account is automatically added to the directory as a guest. On the Users page, you can view the user against the user type, Guest. An application owner can send the guest user a direct link to the application they want to share. Alternatively, the guest user can click the redemption URL in the invitation email. The guest user must accept the invitation to access your organization's resources. Note that a user invitation does not expire. So, can application owners manage their guest users if they have not been added to the directory? Azure AD admins can set up self-service app management for Azure AD Gallery or security assertion markup language or SAML-based apps in their Azure AD tenant. This way, application owners can manage their guest users even if they haven't been added to the directory. When an app is configured for self-service, the application owner uses their access panel to invite a guest user to the app or add a guest user to a group with access to the app. However, self-service app management for Azure AD Gallery and SAML-based apps requires some initial setup by an administrator, which includes enabling self-service group management for your tenant, creating a group to assign to the app and making a user in your organization the owner, configuring the app for self-service, assigning the group to the app. Now, let's look at when to bulk invite external users. Typically, you bulk invite when you must invite several external users to collaborate with your organization. In this case, it saves time to bulk invite users. If your organization uses Azure AD B2B collaboration to work with external partners, you can invite multiple guest users at one go. To bulk invite guest users, first navigate to Users in Azure Active Directory. Then, from the Bulk Operations dropdown, select Bulk Invite. In the Bulk Invite Users window, select Download. This downloads the comma-separated files template, frequently referred to as CSV template, for bulk invites. Ensure to download the latest version of the CSV template. Let's understand the CSV template structure. The CSV template will always open with two rows of existing data. The first row must be preserved as is, else upload will not be processed. This row contains the version number, which is mandatory in the CSV file you'll upload. The second row has column headings, which also must be preserved as is, as they indicate acceptable values and whether they're required. Ensure that you don't add new columns. If the second row is modified, upload will not be processed. The third row has examples of acceptable values for each column. The row comprises information such as the guest user's email address, the redirection URL, an invitation message prompt, and the customized invitation message. You must delete the existing examples and replace them with your own entries. After you add all the desired guest users, upload the CSV file and select Submit. Then, on the User page, verify if the guest users are added to the directory. In this video, you learned to add a guest user to the directory and invite guest users, individually and in bulk, to use your organization's resources. Well done! You've completed learning the concepts related to managing users in Azure Active Directory. Let's recap what you learned. Initially, you were introduced to the role of Azure Security Engineer. You understood this is a critical role that implements, manages, and monitors security for Azure resources as part of an end-to-end infrastructure. You learned that your tasks as a security engineer include identifying and assessing security risks, defining and implementing security controls, monitoring, and handling security incidents. Next, you learned about Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate and the AZ-500 exam. Do you recall the knowledge and skill areas tested in the AZ-500 exam? These areas are Manage Identity and Access, Secure Networking, Secure Compute, Storage and Databases, and Manage Security Operations. Let us now get into the core concepts you learned. You learned how to get started with Azure. You learned about Azure sign-up options, including Azure Free Account and purchasing options. You also understood how billing works in Azure and the various support options. You explored the Azure AD license plans, Azure AD Free, Azure AD Premium P1, and Azure AD Premium P2. You understood that it is essential to specify users' usage location before you assign licenses. Next, you learned that Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, is a cloud-based identity and access management service that enables users to access external and internal resources. You learned that all users are granted a set of default permissions in Azure AD. Member users can register applications, manage their profile photo and mobile phone number, change passwords, and invite B2B guests. These users can also read all directory information, though there are a few exceptions. You also learned that guest users have restricted directory permissions. They can manage their profile, change their password, and retrieve some information about other users, groups, and apps. However, they cannot read all directory information. Can you add restrictions to users' default permissions? Yes. You learned that you could restrict users' default permissions. You understood that an example of a restriction is setting the Register Applications option to No to prevent users from creating application registrations. What about legacy applications? You learned that Azure AD Domain Services, frequently referred to as Azure AD DS, helps you run legacy applications in the cloud. The situation is that these applications cannot use modern authentication methods, or you do not want directory lookups to go to an on-premises ADDS. You can lift and shift these legacy applications from your on-premises environment into a managed domain without the need to manage the ADDS environment in the cloud. Your learning did not stop at concepts. You had the opportunity to practice what you learned through hands-on exercises. You learned how to perform various activities in Azure AD, such as creating and managing users. You learned that users include those belonging to your organization, those belonging to an external organization working as your partners or vendors, and those who need to access your applications or services as consumers. Who will administer these users? You learned that the various administrative roles can be categorized into security and authentication administrators, application administrators, cloud administrators, B2C administrators, and corporate administrators. You learned about the best practice of assigning the role of global administrator to fewer than 5 users. You can assign other administrators for purposes such as adding or changing users, assigning administrative roles, resetting user passwords, managing user licenses, and managing domain names. Another aspect you learned is that you must have a global administrator, privileged authentication administrator, or user administrator role assignment to delete users in your organization. Global administrators and privileged authentication administrators can delete any users, including other administrators. User administrators can delete non-admin users, help desk administrators, and other user administrators. How will you simplify administration? You learned that you could streamline administration by creating and managing Azure AD groups. You learned to create groups of users based on their roles or function, which made it easier to assign or remove permissions. Next, you explored Azure AD administrative units. You learned that an administrative unit is an Azure AD resource that can be a container for other Azure AD resources. You can use administrative units to restrict role permissions to a specific portion of your organization. What is a key point that you learned about administrative units? You learned that when you add a group to an administrative unit, the group is brought into its management scope, not the group members. Finally, you learned that to access resources secured by an Azure AD tenant, a security principal must represent the entity that requires access. You understood that user principals represent users, while service principals represent applications. You learned 3 types of service principals: application, managed identity, and legacy. Phew, that was some good learning. You're now ready to move to the next step of attempting the graded assessment for the module. Best of luck with the module quiz.
Let's say you are working as a security engineer for an agribusiness company that has employees and customers across the globe. You need to decide the authentication method employees can use to identify themselves and access internal and external resources. Which factors would you consider while finalizing the authentication method? As you probably know, a password is the most common authentication method. Why? Because it is easily usable and available. But a password by itself is not very secure. So how can you have a more secure authentication method using Azure AD? Hello and welcome to the video, What Authentication Methods Are Available in Azure AD? In this video, you will learn about the authentication methods available for users in Azure AD. In Azure AD, a password is often one of the primary authentication methods. You can't disable a password authentication method. If you use a password as the primary authentication factor, you can increase the security of sign-in events using Azure AD Multifactor Authentication or MFA. Azure AD Multifactor Authentication adds additional security over only using a password when a user signs in. The user can be prompted for additional forms of authentication, such as to respond to a push notification, enter a code from a software or hardware token, or respond to an SMS or phone call. Let's look at the various authentication methods available on Azure AD and their security, usability, and availability considerations. As you know, a password has high usability and availability, but it is not very secure. So, it isn't good to have just a password. What's a good authentication method? Having a password and responding to an SMS or a phone call. What's even better? Having a password and authenticating through a push notification on the authenticator, OTP on a software or hardware token. While these methods are more secure, there is a trade-off in terms of usability and availability. They are more secure, but not great on usability and availability. So what's the best way to authenticate? It's passwordless. You can choose authentication through a phone sign-in on the authenticator, Windows Hello, FIDO2 security keys, or certificates. Windows Hello is a secure way to get instant access to your Windows device using a PIN, facial recognition, or fingerprint. FIDO2 security keys are an unphishable, standards-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form factor. It allows users and organizations to leverage the standard to sign into their resources without a username or password using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. These authentication methods are high in security, usability, and availability. For flexibility and usability, we recommend using the Microsoft Authenticator app. It provides the best user experience and multiple modes, such as passwordless, multi-factor authentication, and oath codes. Some additional authentication methods can be used in certain scenarios. App passwords can be used for old applications that don't support modern authentication and can be configured for per-user Azure AD multi-factor authentication. Security questions and email address authentication can only be used for self-service password reset or SSPR. So, do you need to select only one authentication method? Not at all. For resiliency, we recommend requiring users to register multiple authentication methods. When one method isn't available for a user during sign-in or SSPR, they can authenticate with another method. Some authentication methods can be used as the primary factor when you sign into an application or device, such as using an FIDO2 security keys or a password. Other authentication methods are only available as a secondary factor when you use Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication or SSPR. When you deploy features like Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication in your organization, review the available authentication methods. Choose the methods that meet or exceed your requirements in terms of security, usability, and availability. Where possible, use authentication methods with the highest level of security. In this video, you learned there are various authentication methods available in Azure AD. Having only a password is the least secure authentication method. Having a password along with an authenticator push notification, software tokens OTP, or hardware tokens OTP is more secure. Being passwordless by using authenticator sign-in, Windows Hello, FIDO2 security keys, or certificate is the most secure. As you know, a password is one of the most common authentication methods. As a security engineer, how do you ensure your users use secure passwords? Hello, and welcome to Password Protection Measures in Azure AD. In this video, you will learn about the password protection measures available in Azure AD. A password policy is applied to all user and admin accounts created and managed directly in Azure AD. You can ban weak passwords and define parameters to lock out an account after repeated bad password attempts. You cannot modify other password policy settings. The Azure AD password policy, by default, doesn't apply to user accounts synchronized from an on-premises AD/DS environment using Azure AD Connect. It will only apply if you enable Enforce Cloud Password Policy for password-synced users property. Azure AD password policy requirements apply for all passwords created, changed, or reset in Azure AD. Requirements are applied during user provisioning, password change, and password reset flows. You can't change these settings except as noted. Let's first look at the characters allowed. Passwords can include uppercase characters, lowercase characters, numbers from 0 to 9, symbols as displayed on the screen, blank space. Note that Unicode characters are not allowed. There are also requirements for password length. They should be a minimum of 8 characters and a maximum of 256 characters. The passwords should also be complex. The password should have 3 out of 4 of the following categories: uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, symbols. The password complexity check is not required for education tenants. Additionally, there is a requirement that the password should not have been recently used. When a user changes or resets their password, the new password can't be the same as the current or recently used passwords. To ensure secure passwords, Azure AD also rolls out banned passwords. The password can't be on the global list of banned passwords for Azure AD password protection. You can also customize a list of banned passwords specific to your organization. Along with the requirements for creating passwords, Azure AD also has password expiration policies. Let's see the expiration requirements for other providers using Azure AD for identity and directory services, such as Microsoft iTunes and Microsoft 365. By default, passwords have an expiration date. A global administrator or user administrator can use the Microsoft Azure AD module for Windows PowerShell to set user passwords not to expire. You can also use PowerShell to remove the never expires configuration or to see user passwords that are set to never expire. Another point you should note is that, by default, only passwords for user accounts that aren't synchronized through Azure AD Connect can be configured to not expire. The maximum password expiry duration or password age by default is 90 days. There is also a policy for password expiry notifications. By default, users are notified of password expiration 14 days before the password expires. You can configure the maximum password expiry duration and the password expiry notification using Windows PowerShell. These password protection measures in Azure AD help ensure your organization's security. In this video, you have learned password policies are applied to all user and admin accounts created and managed directly in Azure AD. Password requirements relate to characters, numbers, symbols, and blank spaces. By default, passwords are set to expire. A global administrator or user administrator can use the Microsoft Azure AD module for Windows PowerShell to set user passwords not to expire. Azure AD Self-Service Password Reset, or SSPR, allows users to change or reset their password without administrator or help desk involvement. If a user's account is locked or they forgot their password, they can follow prompts to unblock themselves and get back to work. How does this benefit your organization? It reduces help desk calls and loss of productivity when a user can't sign into their device or an application. Hello, and welcome to the video, How does Self-Service Password Reset work? In this video, you will learn how Azure AD SSPR works. When a user is enabled for SSPR, they must register at least one authentication method. Multiple authentication methods are available for SSPR, such as mobile app notification, mobile app code, email, mobile phone, and security questions. Users who are tenants with paid subscriptions can also use their office phone to authenticate themselves. As a security engineer, you can configure the number of available authentication methods a user must provide to reset or unlock their password. This value can be set to either 1 or 2. We highly recommend that you choose 2 or more authentication methods so that your users have more flexibility in case they're unable to access one method when they need it. What if a user doesn't have the minimum number of required methods registered when they try to use SSPR? In that case, they see an error page that directs them to request that an administrator reset their password. So how does SSPR work? Users who forget their password can select the Can't Access Your Account link from an application or page. They can also go directly to the SSPR portal. After the SSPR portal is displayed in the required language, the user is prompted to enter a user ID and pass a CAPTCHA. Azure AD now verifies that the user can use SSPR by doing multiple checks. Firstly, it checks that the user has SSPR enabled. If the user isn't enabled for SSPR, the user is asked to contact their administrator to reset their password. Secondly, it checks that the user has the right authentication methods defined on their account in accordance with the administrator policy. For example, if you are choosing multi-factor authentication, the user needs to define at least email or phone number. Similarly, for each authentication method in Azure AD, the appropriate data is different and needs to be defined as a minimum. If the policy only requires one method, it checks that the user has the appropriate data defined for at least one of the authentication methods enabled by the administrator policy. What if the authentication methods aren't configured? In that case, the user is advised to contact their administrator to reset their password. If the policy requires two methods, it checks that the user has the appropriate data defined for at least two of the authentication methods enabled by the administrator policy. Again, if the authentication methods aren't configured, the user is advised to contact their administrator to reset their password. If an Azure administrator role is assigned to the user, then the strong two-gate password policy is enforced. With a two-gate policy, administrators can't use security questions. The two-gate policy requires two pieces of authentication data, such as an email address, an authenticator app, or a phone number. Thirdly, Azure AD checks to see if the user's password is managed on premises. Is the Azure AD tenant using federated, pass-through authentication, or password hash synchronization? If SSPR writeback is configured and the user's password is managed on premises, the user is allowed to proceed to authenticate and reset their password. What if SSPR writeback isn't deployed and the user's password is managed on premises? In that case, they are asked to contact their administrator to reset their password. If all the previous checks are successfully completed, the user is guided through the process of resetting or changing their password. By following this process, Azure AD allows users to easily self-service their passwords and ensure the organization's security. In this video, you learned there are multiple authentication methods available for SSPR. When a user is enabled for SSPR, they must register at least one authentication method. Azure AD verifies that the user is able to use SSPR by doing multiple checks. If all the checks are completed, the user is guided through the process of resetting or changing their password. Do you remember learning about Azure AD multifactor authentication, or MFA? Multifactor authentication is a process in which a user is prompted for additional forms of identification during a sign-in event. For example, the prompt could be to enter a code on their cell phone or to provide a fingerprint scan. When you require a second form of identification, security is increased because this additional factor isn't easy for an attacker to obtain or duplicate. Hello, and welcome to Introduction to Multifactor and Passwordless Authentication. In this video, you will learn about Azure AD multifactor authentication and passwordless authentication. Multifactor authentication helps safeguard access to data and applications, providing another layer of security by using a second form of authentication. These methods include authentication through Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, FIDO2 security key, Oath hardware and software tokens, SMS verification, and voice call verification. We recommend that you enable more than one multi-factor authentication method so that users have a backup method available in case their primary method is unavailable. For the best flexibility and usability, use the Microsoft Authenticator app. This authentication method provides the best user experience and multiple modes, such as passwordless, multi-factor authentication, push notifications, and oath codes. The Microsoft Authenticator app also meets the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, Authenticator Assurance Level 2 requirements. You can also enable multi-factor authentication with conditional access to make the solution fit the specific needs of your organization. These policies allow you to prompt users for multi-factor authentication when needed for security and stay out of users' way when not needed. Conditional access policies can be applied to specific users, groups, and apps. You can define the cloud apps or actions that trigger the conditional access policy. For example, you could decide that access to a financial application or use of management tools require an additional prompt for authentication. The goal is to protect your organization while also providing the right levels of access to the users who need it. We recommend that you enable and use Azure AD multi-factor authentication with conditional access policies. Features like multi-factor authentication are a great way to secure your organization, but users often get frustrated with the additional security layer on top of having to remember their passwords. Passwordless authentication methods are more convenient because the password is removed and replaced with something you have, like a Windows 10 device, phone, or security key with something you are or something you know, such as a biometric or PIN. Each organization has different needs when it comes to authentication. Microsoft Global Azure and Azure Government offer the following through passwordless authentication options that integrate with Azure AD: Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, FIDO2 security keys. Windows Hello for Business is ideal for information workers that have their own designated Windows PC. The biometric and PIN credentials are directly tied to the user's PC, which prevents access from anyone other than the owner. By using the Microsoft Authenticator app, you can also allow your employee's mobile phone to become a passwordless authentication method. The app turns any iOS or Android phone into a strong, passwordless credential. Users can sign into any platform or browser by getting a notification to their phone, matching a number displayed on the screen to the one on their phone, and then using their biometric, touch, or face, or PIN to confirm. FIDO2 security keys allow users and organizations to sign into their resources without a username or password using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. By using multi-factor authentication and passwordless authentication methods, you ensure that the authentication method is easy to use and secure. In this video, you learned multi-factor authentication helps safeguard access to data and applications, providing another layer of security by using a second form of authentication. You can also enable multi-factor authentication with conditional access to make the solution fit the specific needs of your organization. Passwordless authentication methods are more convenient than multi-factor authentication. The following 3 passwordless authentication options that integrate with Azure AD: Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator, FIDO2 security keys. As an Azure security engineer, you are responsible for improving the user authentication process. You will use multi-factor authentication to add an additional layer of security. What are the various settings that you can configure for multi-factor authentication? Hello, and welcome to the video, Configure Multi-Factor Authentication Settings. You can customize the end-user experience with Azure AD multi-factor authentication by configuring settings such as account lockout thresholds and fraud alerts. You will find some authentication settings in the Azure portal for Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. Some settings are in a separate Azure AD multi-factor authentication portal. In this video, you will learn about 4 of the many settings that you can configure in the Azure AD portal for Azure AD. These settings are account lockout, block, unblock users, fraud alert, and notifications. You will access multi-factor authentication settings using the multi-factor authentication page in the security option in Azure AD. You must sign in to the Azure portal as an administrator. It is time to learn about the various settings. The account lockout setting allows you to temporarily lock accounts if there are too many denied authentication attempts in a row. Locking an account will prevent repeated multi-factor authentication attempts as part of an attack. The account lockout settings are applied only when a user enters a PIN code for the multi-factor authentication prompt. In account lockout settings, you can specify how many failed attempts should be allowed before an account becomes locked out for a period. For example, if you mention 3 in this box, the account would be locked out if the user had 3 failed attempts to sign in. The next box allows you to specify the minutes until the account lockout counter is reset. If you set this as 10 minutes, the account would be locked if the user had the specified number of failed attempts within 10 minutes. You will also set the minutes until the account is automatically unblocked. For example, if you want the user to wait 20 minutes for the account to be automatically unblocked after a lockout, you can mention 20 in this box. The next setting is block/unblock users. Using this setting, you can block specific users from being able to receive Azure AD multifactor authentication requests. Any authentication attempts for blocked users are automatically denied. Users remain blocked for 90 days from when they are blocked or until they are manually unblocked. You might use this setting in a situation such as a user's device getting lost or stolen. When you block a user, you will enter the username for the blocked user in the format username@domain.com and then provide a comment in the reason box. You will use the same page to unblock a user. You will now learn about Fraud Alert. You can configure this setting to enable users to report suspicious activity. The user can submit a fraud alert if they receive a 2-step verification request that they did not initiate. You can set the option to block the users who report fraud automatically. This activity will prevent hacking attempts on the same account. You can also use the Report Suspicious Activity feature to allow users to report suspicious activities if they receive an authentication request they did not initiate. You can access this feature on the settings page of authentication methods. When you enable the Report Suspicious Activity feature, you can do it for all users or a specific group. Users can report the fraud attempt using Microsoft Authenticator or phone when an unknown and suspicious multi-factor authentication prompt is received. These alerts are integrated with identity protection for more comprehensive coverage and capability. What happens when a user reports a multi-factor authentication prompt as suspicious? These users are set to high user risk. You can use risk-based policies to limit access for these users. You can also enable self-service password reset, frequently referred to as SSPR, for users to remediate problems on their own. Suppose you previously used the Fraud Alert automatic blocking feature and do not have an Azure AD P2 license for risk-based policies. In this case, you can use risk detection events to identify and disable impacted users and automatically prevent them from signing in. When a user reports a multi-factor authentication prompt as suspicious, the event shows up in the sign-ins report as a sign-in that the user rejected. The event also appears in the audit logs and risk detections report. You will access the authentication details page using the sign-ins option to view the sign-ins report. If fraud is detected, it will appear in result detail as MFA denied, fraud code entered. You can view audit logs in the Audit Logs page in Azure AD. The fraud will be reported as no action taken or user is blocked for MFA based on the tenant level settings for a fraud report. Let us now move to the third report, the Risk Detections report. You can access the Risk Detections report page by selecting the Identity Protection option. In this report, the suspicious event will appear as a high-level risk with the source as end user reported. The detection type will be user-reported suspicious activity. Report suspicious activity and the legacy fraud alert implementation can operate in parallel. You can keep your tenant-wide fraud alert functionality in place while you start to use report suspicious activity with a targeted test group. Suppose a fraud alert is enabled with automatic blocking and report suspicious activity is enabled. In this case, the user will be added to the block list and set as high risk and in scope for any other policies configured. You must remove these users from the block list and remediate their risk to enable them to sign in with multi-factor authentication. You can configure Azure AD to send email notifications when users report fraud alerts. These notifications are typically sent to identity administrators because the user's account credentials are likely compromised. You can access the notifications page by selecting the multi-factor authentication option. To configure fraud alert notifications, you will enter the email address to send the notification. You will enter the email address in the notifications page under the multi-factor authentication option in Azure AD Security. In this video, you learned how to configure various multi-factor authentication settings. You learned about the parameters you can set for account lockout. You also learned how to block users, which is helpful in cases such as the theft of a user's device. Finally, you learned that you could configure options that allow users to raise fraud alerts and the notifications associated with fraud alerts. Hello, and welcome to Test Multi-Factor Authentication. In this video, you will learn how to test multi-factor authentication in Azure AD. Let us say you want to roll out multi-factor authentication for your organization. Before you implement it for all users in the organization, you should implement and test it first. In this example, we have created user C1user1 and enabled multi-factor authentication. Now it is time to test it out. First, go to the Azure portal. Enter the username and select Next. Enter the password and select Sign In. Review the More Information page and select Next. You will see a message to install the Microsoft Authenticator app. For this example, let us test authenticating through the phone. Select I want to use a different authentication method. The different methods for authentication will appear. In this example, let us select Phone. Then, select Confirm. Enter your phone number. Select Text me a code and select Next. You will receive a code via a text message. Enter the code and select Next. An SMS verified message will appear. Select Next. A success message will appear. Review the details and select Done. Next, update the password by providing the old password, a new password, and confirming the new password. Select Sign In. Confirm you can now access the portal. That was simple, wasn't it? You can similarly test multi-factor authentication using other methods. In this video, you have learned how to test multi-factor authentication in Azure AD. Suppose you work as a security engineer in a consultancy firm. You must ensure that the organization and its clients' data are secure. You also want to provide a convenient sign-in experience for your employees. In which ways can you implement passwordless authentication for the employees? Hello, and welcome to Implement Passwordless Authentication. In this video, you will learn how to implement authenticating without a password. As you know, with passwordless authentication, the password is replaced with something you have plus something you are, or something you know. What are the benefits of passwordless authentication? Firstly, it is more secure. You can reduce the risk of phishing and password spray attacks by removing passwords as an attack surface. Secondly, it allows a better user experience and gives users a convenient way to access data from anywhere. It also provides easy mobile access to applications and services such as Outlook, OneDrive, or Office. Thirdly, it gives robust insights. You can gain insights into users' passwordless activity with robust logging and auditing. So how can a user authenticate without a password? There are multiple ways of implementing passwordless authentication in Azure AD. You could enable Windows Hello for Business. It uses a biometric gesture like a face, fingerprint, or device-specific personnel identification number, PIN, that isn't transmitted over a network. It is ideal for information workers that have their own designated Windows PC. The biometric and PIN credentials are directly tied to the user's PC, which prevents access from anyone other than the owner. You could also enable the Microsoft Authenticator app to implement passwordless authentication. As you know, the app turns any iOS or Android phone into a strong, passwordless credential. Users can sign into any platform or browser by getting a notification to their phone, matching a number displayed on the screen to the one on their phone, and then using their biometric, touch or face, or PIN to confirm. Another method for implementing passwordless authentication is Fast Identity Online 2 or FIDO2 security keys. Fast Identity Online, or FIDO, is an open standard for passwordless authentication. FIDO allows users and organizations to leverage the standard to sign into their resources without a username or password, using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. FIDO2 security keys are an unphishable standards-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form. These FIDO2 security keys are typically USB devices, but could also use Bluetooth or near-field communication, frequently referred to as NFC. With a hardware device that handles the authentication, the security of an account is increased, as no password could be exposed or guessed. FIDO2 security keys are a great option for enterprises that are very security sensitive or have scenarios or employees who aren't willing or able to use their phone as a second factor. FIDO2 smart cards are also a new method to use FIDO2 keys for passwordless sign-in via a smart card. Lastly, you can enable temporary access pass for implementing passwordless authentication. The pass is a time-limited passcode that can be configured for multi- or single-use to allow users to onboard other authentication methods. These methods include passwordless methods such as Microsoft Authenticator, FIDO2, or Windows Hello for Business. The temporary access pass also makes recovery easier when a user has lost or forgotten their strong authentication factor, like a FIDO2 security key or Microsoft Authenticator app, but needs to sign in to register new strong authentication methods. Depending on your organization's needs, you can choose any of these methods for implementing passwordless authentication. In this video, you learned passwordless authentication is beneficial because it is more secure, allows for a better user experience, and provides robust insights. You can select from various passwordless authentication methods, including Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, FIDO2 security keys, FIDO2 smart cards, and temporary access pass.
Suppose there is an airline. It has internal and external applications that its employees must be able to access. Some of these applications are on-premises and some are in the cloud. You're working as a security engineer in the company. How can you manage users both on-premises and in the cloud? Hello, and welcome to What is Hybrid Identity? I am Ramanujam Srinivasan. Let's talk about hybrid identity and how to achieve hybrid identity with Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. Microsoft's identity solutions span on-premises and cloud-based capabilities. These solutions create a common user identity for authentication and authorization to all resources, regardless of location. Hybrid identity is the process of connecting your on-premises Active Directory with your Azure AD. You do this to enable a single account to access resources on-premises and in the cloud. Going back to the airlines, by using a hybrid identity, the employees will have access to internal and external apps using a single account. As a security engineer, you can use hybrid identity to share identity, authentication, and access across on-premises and cloud resources. So what do you need to do to use hybrid identity? First, connect your on-premises AD with your Azure AD. Then, select the best authentication option based on your user's needs and your security goals. Lastly, configure authentication options to create your most secure environment. So which authentication methods can you use to achieve hybrid identity with Azure AD? There are 3 options for you to select from: password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, and federation. Let's look at each of these methods in detail. Azure AD password hash synchronization is the simplest way to enable authentication for on-premises directory objects in Azure AD. Why? Because you don't have to deploy any additional infrastructure for authentication. Azure AD Connect synchronizes the hash of a user's password from an on-premises Active Directory instance to a cloud-based Azure AD instance. Your users can use the same credentials that they use on-premises. How does password hash synchronization help your organization? It provides your users a better experience, one less password to remember. Not just that, it also reduces IT help desk costs because your users are less likely to forget how to sign in. Next, let's look at the second method, Azure AD pass-through authentication. It provides a simple password validation for Azure AD Authentication Services using a software agent on one or more on-premises servers. The servers validate the users directly with your on-premises Active Directory, ensuring password validation doesn't happen in the cloud. This feature is an alternative to Azure AD password hash synchronization, which provides the same benefit of cloud authentication to organizations. However, certain organizations wanting to enforce their on-premises Active Directory security and password policies can choose to use pass-through authentication instead. What are the key benefits of using Azure AD pass-through authentication? It offers a great user experience. It is easy to deploy and administer because there is no need for complex on-premises deployments or network configuration. That's not it. It's secure because on-premises passwords are never stored in the cloud in any form. Lastly, let's look at federated authentication. When you choose this method, Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system, such as on-premises Active Directory Federation Services, to validate the user's password. This sign-in method ensures that all user authentication occurs on-premises. This method allows administrators to implement more rigorous levels of access control. Now you know the methods you can use to achieve hybrid identity with Azure AD. Hybrid identity with Azure AD will ensure a better user experience and provide more security to the organization. To sum it up, hybrid identity is the process of connecting your on-premises Active Directory with your Azure AD. Organizations can choose between password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, and federation to meet various business security and technical requirements.
Suppose you work as a security engineer associate for a financial consultancy that has about 400 employees. It also has many financial industry customers and collaborates with other financial companies for projects. The employees and partners must be able to access internal and external applications. Your company has an Active Directory environment on premises. Now, it is moving to Microsoft 365 and Azure. How can you help your company achieve a hybrid identity? Hello, and welcome to Deploy Azure AD Connect. In this video, you will learn about achieving hybrid identity by deploying Azure AD Connect. If you have an existing on-premises directory, such as Active Directory, you can easily integrate it with Azure AD. Microsoft officially recommends Azure AD Connect for synchronizing on-premises identities and objects with Azure AD. Azure AD Connect is an on-premises Microsoft application designed to meet and accomplish your hybrid identity goals. It allows you to provide a common identity for your users for Microsoft 365, Azure, and SaaS applications integrated with Azure AD. Using this feature is free and included in your Azure subscription. Azure AD Connect comes with many features to help you implement identity synchronization. You can use it to create users, groups, and other objects. You can also use it to ensure identity information for your on-premises users and groups matches the cloud. This synchronization also includes password hashes. As you know, Azure AD Connect synchronizes a hash of users' passwords from an on-premises Active Directory instance to a cloud-based Azure AD instance. Using Azure AD Connect, you can also opt for pass-through authentication. It allows users to use the same password on-premises and in the cloud, but doesn't require the additional infrastructure of a federated environment. What about federation integration? Yes, using Azure AD Connect, you can do that too. Federation is an optional part of Azure AD Connect and can be used to configure a hybrid environment using an on-premises AD Federation Services infrastructure. Integrating your on-premises directories with Azure AD using Azure AD Connect makes your users more productive. They can use a single identity to access on-premises applications and cloud services such as Microsoft 365. You only need a single tool to provide an easy deployment experience for synchronization and sign-in. However, this integration creates the challenge of ensuring that this environment is healthy so that users can reliably access resources on premises and in the cloud from any device. How can you monitor the health of the environment? You can use Azure AD Connect Health to ensure the reliability of the environment. This reliability is achieved by using the monitoring capabilities of Azure AD Health Connect for your key identity components. Also, It makes the key data points about these components easily accessible. Azure AD Connect Help provides a central location in the Azure portal to view alerts, performance monitoring, usage analytics, and other information. It is the single lens of health for your key identity components in one place. How complex is the deployment of Azure AD Connect Help? It is as simple as installing an agent on each of your on-premises identity servers. Azure AD Connect Help helps ensure the environment's reliability when you achieve hybrid identity by deploying Azure AD Connect in your organization. In this video, you have learned how Azure AD Connect integrates your on-premises directories with Azure AD. Azure AD Connect provides the following features: password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, federation integration, synchronization, health monitoring. Azure AD Connect Health provides robust monitoring of your on-premises identity infrastructure. Do you know one of the first concerns for organizations that want to move their apps to the cloud? It is choosing the correct authentication method. Hello, and welcome to the video, Explore Authentication Options for Hybrid Identities. In this video, you will learn more about authentication methods for hybrid identities in Azure AD. As a security engineer associate, you must take a thoughtful approach when deciding the authentication method for your organization. Why? There are multiple reasons. Firstly, the authentication method is critical to an organization's presence in the cloud. It controls access to all cloud data and resources. Secondly, the authentication method is the foundation of all the other advanced security and user experience features in Azure AD. Thirdly, identity is the new control plane of IT security, so authentication is an organization's access guard to the new cloud world. Organizations need an identity control plane that strengthens their security and keeps their cloud apps safe from intruders. Choosing the correct authentication method is crucial in setting up an Azure AD hybrid identity solution. Do you remember the 3 authentication methods that can be used when achieving hybrid identity with Azure AD? Now, we will take a deep dive into each one of them. You can choose cloud authentication. When you select this authentication method, Azure AD handles user sign-in process. Coupled with seamless single sign-on, or SSO, users can sign in to cloud apps without re-entering their credentials. With cloud authentication, you can choose from 2 options for authenticating your users. The first cloud authentication method is Azure AD password hash synchronization. As you know, it's the simplest way to enable authentication for on-premises directory objects in Azure AD. It is a feature used to sync user password hashes from an on-premises Active Directory instance to a cloud-based Azure AD instance. Users can use the same username and password that they use on-premises without having to deploy any additional infrastructure. Even if you decide to use federation with Active Directory Federation Services, frequently referred to as ADFS, or other identity providers, you can optionally set up password hash synchronization as a backup in case your on-premises servers fail or become temporarily unavailable. Some premium features of Azure AD, like Identity Protection and Azure AD Domain Services, require password hash synchronization, no matter which authentication method you choose. What's the second cloud authentication method? It's Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication. This method provides a simple password validation for Azure AD authentication services using a software agent that runs on one or more on-premises servers. The servers validate the users directly with your on-premises Active Directory, ensuring password validation doesn't happen in the cloud. Do you remember which organizations this method is suitable for? Companies with a security requirement to immediately enforce on-premises user account states, password policies, and sign-in hours. Besides cloud authentication, you can also choose federation authentication. When you choose this method, Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system, such as on-premises ADFS, to validate the user's password. The authentication system can provide additional advanced authentication requirements. Examples of such advanced authentication requirements are smart card-based authentication or third-party multi-factor authentication. How do you decide which authentication method you should choose for your organization? There are several factors you must consider. Does the effort to deploy the solution and the user's experience of the sign-in process address your business requirements? Does your organization need each authentication method's advanced scenarios and business continuity features? Finally, evaluate the considerations of each authentication method. Do any of them prevent you from implementing your choice? After considering these factors, select an authentication method that meets your organization's business, security, and technical requirements. In this video, you have learned organizations can choose between password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, and federation. Azure AD password hash synchronization is used to sync user password hashes from an on-premises AD instance to a cloud-based Azure AD instance. Azure AD pass-through authentication provides a simple password validation for Azure AD authentication services using a software agent that runs on one or more on-premises servers. In federation authentication, Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system. Suppose you work in a multinational bank as a security engineer associate. The bank employees require access to bank applications on premises and in the cloud. The bank wants to enforce the on-premises Active Directory security and password policies. Because of this, you have recommended pass-through authentication, frequently referred to as PTA, as the authentication method. How can you help the bank implement PTA? Hello, and welcome to the video, Implement Pass-Through Authentication. In this video, you will learn how to implement PTA in Azure AD. As you know, PTA allows users to sign in to both on-premises and cloud-based applications using the same user account and password. When users sign in using Azure AD, PTA validates the user's passwords directly against an organization's on-premises Active Directory. You can configure PTA without a federation service so that any organization, regardless of size, can implement a hybrid identity solution. Let's see some benefits of implementing PTA. Firstly, as you know, it supports user sign-in to all web browser-based applications and Microsoft Office client applications that use modern authentication. Secondly, sign-in usernames can be either the on-premises default username or another attribute configured in Azure AD Connect, also known as an alternate ID. That's not it. Thirdly, it works seamlessly with conditional access features, such as Azure Active Directory multifactor authentication, to help secure your users. Fourthly, it is integrated with cloud-based self-service password management. This feature includes password writeback to on-premises Active Directory and password protection by banning commonly used passwords. Are there more benefits? Yes. Fifthly, multi-forest environments are supported if forest trust exists between your AD forests and name suffix routing is correctly configured. Lastly, PTA protects your on-premises accounts against brute force password attacks in the cloud. That's a lot of benefits. What about the cost? Well, PTA is a free feature, and you don't need any paid additions of Azure AD to use it. How is it deployed? It uses a lightweight on-premises agent that listens for and responds to password validation requests. We recommend installing multiple agents to provide high availability of sign-in requests. How can you enable PTA? It can be easily enabled via Azure AD Connect. If you're installing Azure AD Connect for the first time, choose the custom installation path. On the user sign-in page, choose pass-through authentication as the sign-on method. On successful completion, a pass-through authentication agent is installed on the same server as Azure AD Connect. In addition, the pass-through authentication feature is enabled on your tenant. What if you have already installed Azure AD Connect using Express or Customer installation paths? In that case, select the Change User Sign-In task on Azure AD Connect, then select Next. Then, select Pass-Through Authentication as the sign-in method. Upon successful completion, a pass-through authentication agent is installed on the same server as Azure AD Connect, enabling the feature on your tenant. You need to note that PTA is a tenant-level feature. Turning it on affects the sign-in for users across all the managed domains in your tenant. Suppose you switch from Active Directory Federation Services, frequently referred to as ADFS, to PTA. In that case, you should wait at least 12 hours before shutting down your ADFS infrastructure. This wait time ensures that users can keep signing into Exchange Active Sync during the transition. By using PTA, your organization can use many Azure AD features and keep itself secure. In this video, you have learned PTA allows an organization to use Azure AD features such as single sign-on, password management, role-based access control, published applications, and conditional access policies. PTA is a free feature easily enabled via Azure AD Connect. Suppose you work as a security engineer associate in a defense company. The company is moving from an on-premises Active Directory to Azure AD. Privacy and data security are of utmost importance to the company, so it wants to implement rigorous access control and ensure all user authentication occurs on premises. You suggest that the company selects Federation Authentication for authenticating its users. How can you deploy Federation with Azure AD? Hello, and welcome to the Deploy Federation with Azure AD. In this video, you will learn how to deploy Federation with Azure AD. As you know, Federation is a collection of domains that have established trust. The level of trust may vary, but typically includes authentication. It almost always includes authorization. A typical federation might include a number of organizations that have established trust for shared access to a set of resources. You can federate your on-premises environment with Azure AD and use this federation for authentication and authorization. AD Federation Services, or ADFS, offers simplified, secured identity federation and web single sign-on capabilities. This sign-in method ensures that all user authentication occurs on premises and users can access all resources in the cloud. What are some benefits of deploying ADFS? First, it's high availability. With the power of Azure availability sets, you ensure a highly available infrastructure. Second, it is easy to scale. Need more performance? Easily migrate to more powerful machines with just a few clicks in Azure. Third, there is cross-geo redundancy. With Azure Geo Redundancy, you can be assured that your infrastructure is highly available globally. Lastly, it is easy to manage. With highly simplified management options in the Azure portal, managing your infrastructure is easy and hassle-free. When deploying Federation with Azure AD, what design principles should you keep in mind? We'll give you 6. First, think about the number of users. Do you have fewer than 1,000 users? You can install the ADFS role on your domain controllers. What if you do not want any performance impact on the domain controllers? Or you have more than 1,000 users? Then, deploy ADFS on separate servers. Second, consider how your users will reach ADFS when not on the company network. It is necessary to deploy Web Application Proxy Servers, or WAP servers, so that users can reach the ADFS when they are not on the company network also. Third, how will you ensure high availability? To ensure the high availability of ADFS and WAP servers, we recommend using an internal load balancer for ADFS servers and Azure Load Balancer for WAP servers. Fourth, think about redundancy. We recommend grouping 2 or more virtual machines in an availability set for similar workloads. This configuration ensures that at least one virtual machine will be available during either a planned or unplanned maintenance event. Fifth, consider how to ensure that deployment remains available if the storage account goes down. We recommend having 2 storage accounts. Having a single storage account can lead to the creation of a single point of failure. It can cause the deployment to become unavailable in an unlikely scenario where the storage account goes down. 2 storage accounts will help associate one storage account for each fault line. Lastly, consider where to deploy the WAP servers. We recommend deploying the WAP servers in a separate perimeter network, also known as Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, or Screened Subnet. You can divide one virtual network into 2 subnets, and then deploy the WAP servers in an isolated subnet. You can configure each subnet's network security group settings and allow only required communication between the two subnets. To sum it up, deploying federation with Azure AD allows administrators to implement more rigorous levels of access control. In this video, you have learned: when deploying federation with Azure AD, you must consider factoring in the number of users, deploying WAP servers, using an internal load balancer, grouping 2 or more virtual machines, having 2 or more storage accounts, deploying WAP servers on perimeter network. Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, self-service password reset, lets users reset their password in the cloud. But most companies also have an on-premises Active Directory Domain Services, frequently referred to as ADDS, environment for users. What happens if password changes happen in the cloud, but not on premises? It can cause sign-in problems for the user. How does Microsoft ensure traditional on-premises ADDS synchronizes with password changes in the cloud? By password writeback. Welcome to How Does Password Writeback Work? In this video, you will learn how password writeback works in Azure AD. Password writeback is a feature of Azure AD Connect. Once it is enabled, users can reset their passwords in Azure AD and have the new password synchronized in real time back to the on-premises AD. Password writeback takes care of password changes in the cloud by removing the need to set up an on-premises solution for users to reset their passwords. This feature is particularly useful for organizations that have a hybrid environment where they have both cloud and on-premises applications. The authentication methods could be federation, password hash synchronization, or pass-through authentication. How can you enable password writeback? In the Microsoft Azure Active Directory Connect portal, navigate to Optional Features and select the Password Synchronization and Password Writeback checkboxes. A great feature of Password Writeback is zero-delay feedback. Password Writeback is a synchronous operation. Users are notified immediately if their password doesn't meet the policy or can't be reset or changed for any reason. What happens when a user attempts to reset or change a password in the cloud? First, a check is performed to see if the password is managed on premises. If it is managed on premises, a second check is performed to see if the writeback is enabled. If password writeback is not enabled, the user is informed that their password can't be reset right now. You can see in this diagram that there is no writeback from the cloud to AD Connect and on-premises AD. If password writeback is enabled, the password is synchronized to on-premises AD, and the user can reset their password. When the user is resetting their password, they pass the appropriate authentication gates and reach the Reset Password page. The user selects a new password and confirms it. Once the user updates the password, which meets the ADDS password policies, Azure AD stores this password securely in the cloud. Password writeback then synchronizes the new password back to the on-premises AD, overriding the existing password for that user. When the user updates or resets the password, which password policy would be applicable? The on-premises password policy or the cloud password policy? The on-premises policy. When a user resets their password, it's checked to ensure it meets your on-premises ADDS policy before committing it to that directory. This review includes checking the history, complexity, age, password filters, and any other password restrictions that you define in ADDS. This policy ensures that your on-premises policy is enforced in the cloud, no matter if you use password hash synchronization, pass-through authorization, or federation to provide single sign-on. In this video, you learned how password writeback enables users to reset their passwords in Azure AD and have the new password synchronized back to the on-premises AD. It is useful for organizations that have a hybrid environment where they have both cloud and on-premises applications. With password writeback, the on-premises password policy is enforced. Well done! You've completed learning the concepts related to managing secure access in Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. Let's recap what you learned. Initially, you were introduced to the authentication methods available in Azure AD. You learned that using only a password is the least secure authentication method, but having a password along with authenticator push notification, software tokens OTP, or hardware tokens OTP is more secure. However, going passwordless using Microsoft Authenticator, Authenticator Lite, Windows Hello, FIDO2 security key, or Oath hardware or software tokens is the most secure authentication method. Next, you learned about password protection measures in Azure AD. Remember that password policies are applied to all user and admin accounts created and managed directly in Azure AD. The password requirements relate to characters, numbers, symbols, and blank spaces. You also learned about configuring banned passwords and the two types of banned password lists. You learned that the global banned password list is a default list based on Azure AD security telemetry and analysis results, and the custom banned password list allows you to add internal, organization-specific terms to the list to enhance security. You also understood how passwords are evaluated. Then, you explored enabling users to unlock their accounts using self-service password reset, frequently referred to as SSPR, without administrator or help desk involvement. Next, you deep dived into the core concept of deploying and configuring multifactor authentication. This authentication method helps safeguard access to data and applications by providing another layer of security. You also learned to enable multi-factor authentication with conditional access to make the solution suit your organization's specific needs. You understood that you could configure options that allow users to raise fraud alerts and their associated notifications. Another aspect of your learning was that you could customize user experiences by configuring various Azure AD multi-factor authentication settings for Oath tokens and phone calls. Oath time-based one-time password TOTP hardware tokens typically come with a secret key or seed that's pre-programmed in the token. You then need to input these keys into Azure AD. Your understanding of multi-factor authentication did not end with theoretical concepts. You also had the exciting opportunity to implement and test multi-factor authentication through hands-on exercises. Next, you learned that Azure AD has multiple settings that determine how often users need to re-authenticate. Re-authentication could be with a first-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. You also learned that you could configure these re-authentication settings in Azure AD to best suit your environment and the user experience you want to create. Now, what if some of your organization's resources are on-premises and some are in the cloud? Can you manage them both? Of course! You learned that Microsoft Identity Solutions span on-premises and cloud-based capabilities and create a common user identity for authentication and authorization of all resources, regardless of location. You also learned that hybrid identity is the process of connecting your on-premises AD with your Azure AD. You do this to enable a single account to access resources on-premises and in the cloud. You were also introduced to the 3 cloud authentication methods to achieve hybrid identity with Azure AD: password hash synchronization, PHS, pass-through authentication, PTA, and federation. PHS is the simplest way to enable authentication for on-premises directory objects in Azure AD. PTA provides a simple password validation for Azure AD authentication services using a software agent that runs on one or more on-premises servers. On the other hand, in federation authentication, Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system, such as on-premises Active Directory federation services, to validate the user's password. Next, you learned about achieving hybrid identity by deploying Azure AD Connect, an on-premises Microsoft application designed to meet and accomplish your hybrid identity goals. You learned that it allows you to provide a common identity for your users for Microsoft 365, Azure, and Software as a Service, SaaS, applications integrated with Azure AD. You were also taken through the features of Azure AD Connect: PHS, PTA, federation integration, synchronization, and health monitoring. So, Is there something that can help you choose the most appropriate authentication method for your organization? Yes! You learned how the Azure AD Authentication Decision Tree provides a concise framework to help select the most appropriate authentication method based on your organization's specific requirements. The Authentication Decision Tree visually represents the various authentication options available and the factors to consider when choosing a suitable authentication method. Finally, you learned how password writeback enables users to reset their password in Azure AD and synchronize the new passwords to the on-premises AD. This feature comes in handy for organizations that have a hybrid environment. Whoa, that was a fantastic learning experience. You're now ready to move to the next step of attempting the graded assessment for this module. Good luck with the module quiz.
You have explored a range of fascinating topics in the Secure Access with Azure Active Directory course. How much information are you able to retain? A course summary allows you to review and internalize key concepts and improve retention. Let us look at what you learned in the first week. You understood that an Azure security engineer implements, manages, and monitors security for Azure resources as part of an end-to-end infrastructure. You learned that the AZ-500 exam tests your knowledge and skills in managing identity and access, securing networking, securing compute, storage, and databases, and managing security operations. You started with the core concepts by learning that you could use a free account or purchasing options to sign up for Azure. You also understood how billing works in Azure and the various support options. Next, you learned that Azure AD is a cloud-based identity and access management service that enables users to access external and internal resources. You explored the license plans of Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD. The license plans are Azure AD Free, Azure AD Premium P1, and Azure AD Premium P2. What else did you learn about Azure AD? You learned about the various types of users: member users, guest users, and consumer users. You understood that all users are granted a set of default permissions in Azure AD, and permissions vary between member and guest users. You explored the various settings, such as register applications, which you could use to restrict users' default permissions. You learned how to improve user experience by providing a unified identity solution to your users by integrating on-premises Active Directory using Azure AD Domain Services. You had the opportunity to practice creating and managing users and groups in Azure AD. You learned that the proper role assignment helps you limit access to only those who need it, reducing the risk of accidental or intentional misuse of resources. You learned that you could assign other administrators for purposes such as adding or changing users, assigning administrative roles, resetting user passwords, managing user licenses, and managing domain names. Another aspect you learned is that you must have a global administrator, privileged authentication administrator, or user administrator role assignment to delete users in an organization. You learned that you could streamline administration by creating and managing Azure AD groups. You learned that you could use administrative units to restrict role permissions to a specific portion of your organization. Finally, you completed the first week by learning about the security principle. You learned that to access resources secured by an Azure AD tenant, a security principle must represent the entity that requires access. The second week's content covered authentication methods available in Azure AD. You learned that being passwordless by using authenticator sign-in, Windows Hello, fast identity online 2 security keys, or certificate is the most secure authentication method. Next, you learned that password policies are applied to all users and admin accounts created and managed directly in Azure AD. You learned about the global banned password list and the custom banned password list. You explored enabling users to unlock their accounts using self-service password reset without administrator or help desk involvement. You also learned to enable multifactor authentication with conditional access to make the solution suit your organization's specific needs. You understood that you could configure options that allow users to raise fraud alerts and their associated notifications. Another aspect of your learning was that you could customize user experiences by configuring various Azure AD multifactor authentication settings for phone calls and open authentication tokens, frequently referred to as OAuth tokens. You had the opportunity to practice implementing and testing multi-factor authentication and enabling users to unlock their accounts. What else did you learn? You learned that Azure AD has multiple settings, determining how often users need to re-authenticate. You learned that Microsoft Identity solutions span on-premises and cloud-based capabilities and create a common user identity for authentication and authorization of all resources, regardless of location. You were also introduced to the 3 cloud authentication methods to achieve hybrid identity with Azure AD: password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, and federation. Next, you learned about achieving hybrid identity by deploying Azure AD Connect. You learned that the authentication decision tree visually represents various authentication options available and the factors to consider when choosing a suitable authentication method. Finally, you learned how password writeback enables users to reset their passwords in Azure AD and synchronize the new passwords to the on-premises AD. Great job on completing your learning journey. You are now ready to move on to the course project. The project offers an exciting chance for you to put your new learning into practice, receive valuable feedback from peers, and provide feedback on their work in return. Have you ever experienced the thrill of winning a game or competition and feeling on top of the world? Winning gives a feeling of accomplishment and pride. Graded assessments allow you to get this sense of accomplishment and see how your hard work pays off with a good score. Hello, and welcome to the video about the graded assessment. In this video, you will learn important details related to the graded assessment at the end of the course. You have learned all the concepts covered in the course, Secure Access with Azure Active Directory. You might have completed the hands-on exercises to strengthen your learning. It is time for the final graded assessment, which will test your understanding of securing access with Azure Active Directory. The graded assessment evaluates your knowledge and understanding of the course content. It provides valuable feedback on your exam-taking skills, such as time management and test anxiety, that you can apply to your exam preparation strategy for the AZ-500 certification exam. The graded assessment also provides valuable insight into areas you need to improve. There may be several aspects of the assessment that you're curious about, including the number of questions, how the scoring will be done, and the assessment duration. To better understand these details, let us dive deeper into the specifics. What types of questions can you expect in the final graded assessment? The graded assessment consists of multiple choice questions. You will often be presented with a scenario that you must carefully analyze to answer the question correctly. You will notice that the question formats are similar to the knowledge checks you have completed throughout the course and the module level graded assessment. We have designed this question format to help you feel more at ease with the types of questions commonly found on the AZ-500 exam. Each question in the graded assessment carries a value of 1 point, with a total of 20 points available for you to earn. It is important to note that there is no negative marking for incorrect answers. Even if you are unsure about a particular question, it is still worth attempting to answer it to the best of your ability. Do not be afraid to make an educated guess if needed. In addition, the graded assessment allows you to navigate back and forth between questions and modify your answers before submitting your final responses. This feature allows you to review your work, make any necessary adjustments to ensure you're fully satisfied with your answers before submitting the assessment. It is important to note that you must achieve a score of at least 80% to pass the assessment. This means that out of the 20 questions, you will need to answer at least 16 correctly. It is important to take your time and read each question carefully before selecting your response. What is the assessment duration? To ensure you have ample time to carefully consider each question and provide thoughtful response, we have designed the final graded assessment to last 1 hour, giving you approximately 3 minutes to answer each of the 20 questions. Unlike the AZ-500 exam, there is no time pressure to complete the assessment within the stipulated time, as no timer will stop you from continuing after the allotted time has passed. Nevertheless, we strongly advise you to complete the assessment within 1 hour to practice for the speed expected in the AZ-500 exam. As you prepare for the graded assessment, remember that you can still brush up on any key concepts that you may need to review. Take advantage of this time to refresh your knowledge and ensure you feel confident in understanding foundational security concepts such as the shared responsibility model. You can also review what you learned about creating and managing users and groups in the cloud and hybrid context in Azure Active Directory. You can also revisit the topics of managing authentication in Azure Active Directory and implementing passwordless and multifactor authentication in cloud and hybrid Azure contexts. To prepare effectively for the AZ-500 certification exam, we recommend that you recreate a similar environment for this graded exam. This includes finding a quiet space to take the exam and closing all other applications and browser pages to simulate the exam condition. You may remember that for the AZ-500 certification exam, you have the option to take the exam at a test center or from the comfort of your own home. Best wishes for the final graded assessment of the course, Secure Access with Azure Active Directory. Congratulations! You have completed the Secure Access with Azure Active Directory course. This is the first course in a series of 7 courses in the Microsoft Azure Security Engineer Associate Professional Certificate Training Program. This course is part of the preparation for the AZ-500 Microsoft Azure Security Technologies exam. The content you learned in this course maps to the Manage Identity and Access area of the exam. Recall that you can expect 25 to 30% of exam questions from this area. By learning the content in this course, you have prepared well to answer questions on identity and access management best practices, including configuring and managing Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, authentication, and conditional access policies. You learn to create and manage users in Azure AD. You also learn to manage groups and administrative units in Azure AD. Next, you learned about authentication, including multifactor and passwordless authentication. Finally, you learned about hybrid identity and connecting on-premises Active Directory with Azure AD. You have now moved one step closer in your preparation for the AZ-500 exam. Remember to refer to the Microsoft website to view the latest updates on the AZ-500 exam. Before you sign off from this course, you will watch a video on the next steps that you will take to proceed further in this training program. See you in the following video. Well done! You have made it to the final video of Secure Access with Azure Active Directory. Take a moment to acknowledge and celebrate this accomplishment. Your next step is to move on to the next course, Identity Protection and Governance. This is the second course in the series of 7 courses that prepare you for the AZ-500 certification exam. Identity protection refers to a set of measures and processes you will design to secure digital identities and prevent identity theft, fraud, and misuse of personal information. For example, you might use multi-factor authentication to safeguard user accounts. Identity governance ensures that users have the right access at the right time. Through identity governance, you can balance your organization's need for security and employee productivity with the right processes and visibility. Azure Active Directory, frequently referred to as Azure AD, provides identity protection and governance capabilities through its services, which include identity protection and privileged identity management, referred to as PIM. What aspects of identity protection and governance will you learn in the next course? In the Identity Protection and Governance course, you will learn how to deploy and manage Azure AD Identity Protection. Next, you will learn how to configure Azure AD PIM. PIM mitigates the risk of excessive, unnecessary, or misused access permissions. Then you will learn how to implement and configure Azure policies. As an Azure security engineer, you will use Azure policy to enforce organizational standards and assess compliance at scale. What else is in store for you in the next course? You will learn how to implement role-based access control, frequently referred to as RBAC. You will then learn how to enable resource locks in Azure. You can use resource locks to ensure policy compliance and protect resources against accidental deletion and unauthorized modification. Finally, in the Identity Protection and Governance course, you will learn how to deploy Azure blueprints. Who doesn't like to try out things themselves? The Identity Protection and Governance course provides you with practical skills through hands-on exercises. For example, the course provides step-by-step instructions on configuring Azure AD Identity Protection and Azure AD PIM for roles, resources, and groups. In this video, you learn that your next step is taking the second course in this training program, Identity Protection and Governance. You understood that the course would cover securing user accounts and creating policies to provide access to the right users at the right time. Are you ready to take your Azure security skills to the next level? See you in the next course.